Demons, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, overcoming a 28-point deficit in the last quarter to claim the 4 points by the narrowest of margins in an absolute blockbuster at the MCG on Friday night. Joining me tonight to revel in the amazing come-from-behind victory is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to all the Demonland listeners. Well, what happened in that game? 15 minutes into the first quarter, we would have thought, how do we lose this? At the end of the game, we'd be saying, how in the hell did we win this? So let's try and find out.
Yes, let's find out. Also joining us to dissect our incredible win is our stats man, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Fantastic game. And doesn't it make a difference to the weekend when you win on the Friday night, and particularly when you win a game like that? But it was just a fantastic night of the footy, and it was, that. They've been really working hard to pump up the crowd and to get that aspect of getting not only the crowd to the footy, but people, really cheering and getting into it. And that seemed to be a real theme from the players. Track was really animated. I don't know if you noticed, but, he was frequently sort of exhorting the crowd to get into it after his goals that he kicked. And I have zero doubt that it was a factor in that win. So, for obviously coaches and the players, well done, but well done for every single D's fan that went to the footy on Friday night, because I literally have no doubt in my mind that the noise from the crowd was a factor in that win. Just one good example was Track finally getting a free kick for being grappled. That wouldn't have happened if it weren't for all of the preliminary sort of noises from the crowd pointing it out to the umpire what was happening. So I really think it was a massive factor, and I'm hoping that, once the season we get rolling from here, is that the crowd can continue to play that sort of role and get to the footy and be loud.
It was a record crowd, I think, but a home and away crowd between Melbourne and Brisbane. I saw a lot of opposition supporters sort of saying, well, what's that for a Friday night? It's not a big crowd. Is it not a big crowd for a third v fourth? Is it disappointing?
Who cares?
Yeah,
that was I was actually surprised. I got there about 45 minutes early, and I thought, oh God, there's only going to be 25,000 people here, but it really filled out. And the members' side of the ground was it was in force. These fans in force, red and blue, and they were loud. We were loud. It was a really ferocious. So 40,000 on a Friday night that's cold is. Where are the Brisbane fans? Where are the Lions fans in Melbourne?
Yeah, I think as well, when people watch it on TV, they don't get the where the cameras are pointing is pointing to the side that's not full, the members' side, the MCC side, and where most of the
that's right, exactly. It's AFL. That's right, and we don't. I'm guessing this, but I presume Melbourne would be lower down on the members for the AFL members because there's the MCC and. So, it makes sense that side of the ground is, but I'm getting a bit sick though of everything Melbourne does. There's a bloody asterisk on it at the moment in the public discourse. It's like, okay, well, we have a big win, and what's the talk about is Brodie Grundy. I mean, the D's, did they put the Q in the rack, the Lions? It wasn't the D's brilliance, it was the Lions putting the Q in the rack. Oh, 39,000. Well, God, what sort of club, at that top end only gets 39,000? How about celebrating what was just one of the all-time great wins and one of the great games of the season?
Well, we do have a bit of a question a bit later on about that, not about the crowd, but about how the media sort of perceives Melbourne, and no doubt, B-Man, you'll get right stuck into the media when we talk about that. Each week, I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we'll read them out on the show. The 5 stars absolutely does help boost the podcast and get more people listening. Unfortunately, there was no feedback left in this past week on Apple Podcasts. So come on, our loyal listeners. If you love the show and want to help us out, get on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. Now, I did find out that you can search other geographical locations around the world and find the feedback left by listeners who live in those locations. And I will dip into those in the coming weeks. But I thought that this week I'd read some of the feedback that we've received for the podcast via social media and give those people a shout out. Matt B writes, excellent podcast, entertaining analysis and insight from Andy, George and Binman. Well, thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. Matt left a rating in the review section on our Facebook page. So if you listen to this podcast and you follow us on Facebook, we really would appreciate a review there too, like Matt has done, and we'll read that out on the show as well. Peter H writes, love you, Binman. I nearly smashed the screen trying to get to Buckley. What a tool. Now, Peter left that comment on Facebook under our last week's podcast post. So if you do have any feedback or a question or a comment, you can post it there and we'll read it out. That comment was in relation to Binman's diatribe about Nathan Buckley last week when Bucks voiced concerns about the D's credentials after the Saints match. And I wonder what Bucks thinks about us now. Luann C sent us a DM on Facebook and says, looking forward to a 3-hour podcast. Well, Luann, you might just be right. This could be a long one. I've had a nap. I'm refreshed. I'm ready to go. I hope my co-hosts are there and you, the listeners, are ready to go as well. George mentioned that he had brought a pillow with him. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. Keep the feedback coming. Don't forget to leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click the write a review link, and you can write a review and we'll read it out on the show. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demons fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for this show, there are also multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. You can even chat with George and Binman. So join in on the conversation. I assure you it's really far superior to anything you'll read on any social media platform. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, then please give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 9016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute, and then I'll bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. During the week, you can call that number, leave a message, and we'll play it on the show. We've got a couple to play tonight. If you are listening live, you can join us in the chat room. Simply head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be attentive to the comments and questions posted there. I'll rely on you boys to keep an eye on it. And if you see anything you want to bring up, please do. We're live every Monday, so if you want to listen to us live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. So let's get into the match wrap-up. George, you aptly titled your match report Out of the Fire, and that was the perfect description. The D's came out breathing fire, blitzing the opposition in the first 10 minutes before Brisbane had even posted a score. The free-flowing, fast-paced game style has not been seen in weeks, and I believe our own Binman predicted this last week. So hopefully the loading period is now well and truly behind us. After the first quarter blitzkrieg, I thought I could finally enjoy a game of footy again without my blood pressure rising and without receiving a high heart rate alert on my watch. But those expectations were soon shattered as the Lions relentlessly attacked the footy and took the game on, slicing through our defences to take the lead at halftime by a point, and then continued that effort after the main break and into the last quarter, forging a 9-goal turnaround to lead by 28 points with 17 minutes to go. In the afterglow of the famous victory, it's easy to gloss over the 9-goal turnaround, but we'll no doubt discuss that as we dissect the game later in the show. At this stage, my MFCSS was in overdrive and I fully expected a complete capitulation and was envisaging a 10-goal thumping. What came next, I simply was not expecting and still cannot believe what actually transpired. From out of the blue, or more aptly, as George so eloquently put in his match report, from out of the fire, the D's found their own fire. Cozzy Pickett found some form, kicking his third for the night after a great contest and follow-up. Minutes later, Jake Melksham reduced the deficit to 2 goals with a nice snap from the member side boundary, and then Jake Viney produced the biggest steal of the night when he viciously snatched the ball out of Big O's hands and snapped truly in front of goal to put the D's down by only 5 points with 2 minutes to play. From a boundary throw-in, captain Max Gawn grabs the ball and deftly dishes it off to Angus Brayshaw, who quickly snaps the ball high into the forward 50, and the ball is marked with 2 bites of the cherry by the hero of the night. I could barely bring myself to look as the incredible Melk lined up for goal, and I watched the ball sail through the big sticks through the fingers covering my face. Agony turned to ecstasy as the crowd erupted, and with 30 seconds left on the clock, we still needed to win the next clearance, and we did as Jack Viney extracted the ball to pump it forward. We couldn't lock the ball in, and the Lions had one more chance as the ball sailed into their forward 50, but Jake Lever saved the day with a mark against Hipwood. As the siren sounded, these fans erupted as we pulled the important 4 points out of the fire. And we'll discuss the stars of the night later in the show. Max Gawn as the solo rock star. Track was an absolute bull with his 4 goals, as was Jake Viney, who is relishing his time in the middle. Trent Rivers took his game up a notch with some critical contests and drives forward. Cozzy found a bit of touch and impacted the scoreboard. Melksham was huge, and in addition to being the match winner, took some crucial contested marks, including the one that led up to Cozzy's final quarter goal. Lockie Hunter was prolific on the wing with 559 metres gained, and young Wowie showed a glimpse of his class with an electrifying goal on the run from the boundary. I'm still in disbelief, but what a game to remember. George, how are you feeling?
Yeah, well, it was certainly most unexpected given where we sat even to halfway through the last quarter. It was, but I think we'd been coming back from about halfway through the third quarter in that particular game, just grinding them down slowly. As there were a couple of things I really enjoyed out of the game, and these are sort of from left field, and some of them are from our own posters, so I don't know exactly who to attribute them to. But somebody noted that if you beat West Coast by 60-plus points 1 week, the next team, only one team has won, plus a draw to Sydney. So playing against West Coast and absolutely thumping them is of no benefit to anyone. But the other thing I really enjoyed in this game was watching the longest kick ever recorded in AFL history, when Max Gawn kicked the ball 50 metres up in the air, 50 metres down and 50 metres horizontally. Far surpassed anything else that we've ever seen in the game of football. So, but on a more serious note, I think this game confirmed for both sides. I mean, at the end of the day, people have got to remember this was 3v4, 2 very good teams, very evenly matched in all aspects of the game. But the big factor was on display for both sides was the importance of momentum. When you're in front and when you've got that momentum, you need to keep pushing with it. You can't allow the opposition to get a sniff. We got out a long way in front in the first quarter, and then we throttled back a bit, or whatever happened in that first quarter. They got the momentum back, and then certainly the final example was in that last quarter where they dropped off the momentum scale, and we upped it to an enormous new level. So, we've heard Goodwin talk about momentum and how important it is in the game. And that's just the nature of what we'll see in the coming months in finals. It's very important when you do have that momentum behind them that you utterly capitalise. And there are a couple of other sides on the weekend who didn't do that and finished up losing the game. But it was a great game to go to.
Just brief comments from me. That there's a fair bit in the of my thoughts are mixed up in those questions, so I won't do what I've done previously, Annie, and answer those questions now. But just some thoughts that aren't covered in the question is, for me, probably the most positive thing was the sense of in that third quarter, when the momentum that George talks about did start swinging back our way, is that I felt 100% confident we were still in the game. And if truth be told, last year and the back half of the season, there were so many games where in my heart of hearts, I didn't feel that way. Like the best example was the last time we played, or the last game we played them in the finals last year, is that just, I felt like we didn't have the run in our legs. As soon as that third quarter that went back and forth, I really had the sense that, right, even if we don't win this game, it was a fair margin to come back from. Even if we don't win it, what was really pleasing was that we're fit and running on top of the ground. That was just so evident. So that's the first thing. The second thing is sort of touching a bit on what George said. I heard a number of commentators and ex-footballers talk about the thing about playing good teams is that you often have to win the game multiple times within the match, which is breaking that momentum and getting the momentum back. So there's that. With the running over the top is that, there's a lot of talk about them going defensive in that last quarter. I think that's a nonsense. They put Gunston back late, but that was with 5 minutes to go. And it actually wasn't that silly a move at that point. It was because they were, we were running on top of them and we were clearly fitter. So that huge tick. They won't get much credit. They get a lot of criticism, the high performance at all clubs when things don't go right, but a huge tick for Selwyn Griffith and his team and the Medicos because we're looking fit. And for the very first time in a long time, I heard one of our players, and it was our skipper, Max, reference our fitness directly after the game. And he made a point of saying we are fit. And I think that point wasn't for the fans. That point was for the Pies to say we are fit and we are coming. And I haven't heard them reference their fitness at all this season, except right at the beginning to say they've had a great preseason. The other thing is that the Lions are a seriously good footy team, and I was super impressed. As I noted last week, their big weakness in my perspective is their lack of leg speed. And I think that's still the case, but it's remarkable the impact two players can have, I think, as both Ashcroft and Fletcher have got wheels and both really injected it. So you bring two players with genuine leg speed in the team and you drop Rich, who's like the anti-speed runner, and it makes a huge difference. And I think defensively also that they've really improved their defence. So they were very, very impressive, I thought, the Lions. So, there's no asterisks on this win. This was a super, super, super win against a team that, maybe I've underestimated a little. Again, this is the second time I've seen them. They blitzed us in the first time we played them this season. Followed a very similar script. A lot of people disregarded the fact that we came back hard and managed to bring that game to under 4 goals. That lost because of the break in the with the lights going off. But the same pattern happened. We ran over the top of Brisbane twice now. So it tells me we're fit, we're firing, we're fitter than and faster than Brisbane. So huge win from all of those angles.
All right, let's get into the stats files because we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of listeners' questions coming up. So, B-Man, take it away.
Right, yeah, so the key stats, it was a fascinating game stat-wise. It was a fascinating game on a lot of levels, and I have no idea what this is, Andy. You and George would have a better idea, I think, about the score worm was almost identical, and it went at half-time and the sort of curve of it, and someone on Demonland in the stats file thread posted something about it being a stock market curve or some such. So I have no idea what that meant, apart from the fact that it looked pretty. And but some of the stats were remarkably similar. So the key stats for the Ds, as we've talked about a lot, inside 50s, they actually had 5 more inside 50s than us. And they at one point were, I think, 7 up or 8 up, might have even been further up than that. So they really did a good job with territory. And we'll talk a little bit about how they went about it. It was slightly different to us going straight lines. The contested possessions was the critical number. It was really interesting listening to the press conferences. Both press conferences were really interesting. I thought Fagan was really sanguine in the way he approached it and seemed pretty calm. He said basically the difference, the game was contested possessions, plus 21. He pointed out that we smashed him in that first quarter and smashed him in the last quarter. He said the whole game swung on contested possessions. We're both contested possessions team. But the other one is, as I talked about last week, is that their one wood is scoring from stoppages. They're a brilliant stoppage team. But we matched him in that area. We had plus 5 for centre clearances, scores from centre clearances, and plus 8 from stoppage clearances. So that's 13 clearances. 13 plus 13 from clearances. So that went those two, the contested possessions and stoppages, as we talked about last week. They were the key we had to win them to win the game, and we did. They marked 17 times inside 50, and again, there's this phenomena of teams kicking up on that high half-forward flank, and they really did a good job of stretching our defence and separating Lever and May, I thought, and both of them got outmarked a couple of times one-on-one. Lever's strength isn't one-on-one. May had not a great game, and we'll probably touch on that. Off a 6-day break, his back doesn't look right still. So marks inside 50, 17 to 12. A lot of them were up around the 50-metre mark. Again, it was those medium players that trouble us. Bailey was terrific. McCarthy, Cameron was well held, but still dangerous. So that almost was the difference. I think the tackles were worth +3 for them, so that for us, so they were right on. Tackles inside 50, so again, a real bellwether for us. That it tackles inside 50 was 14-10, so +4, impressive. It may not have felt like that. Here's a number, though, it was real concerning, and I think this goes back to the way they stretched us. Our defensive one-on-one losses were 26, almost 27% of the times we lost defensive one-on-ones, and they only lost 9% one-on-ones. So they defensively were better than us in terms of their one-on-one contest, and we struggled. We really struggled, and I think that was in that period, the second quarter and the first half of the third quarter. This one was really interesting. I think it goes to the way they were scoring, and it speaks to that point as well, is that for this season, we're averaging 34 points from our defensive half. We could only manage 28 in this match, so they did a really good job of stopping us on transition. What was more concerning was that our season average of giving up points from the defensive half is just a tick over 24, and we gave up 50 in this game. Almost literally the half of our scores, of the Lions' score, were from their defensive half. And I think that has a lot to do with the way they chained it out of with those short kicks. We'll speak a bit about that a bit more later. This was an incredible number in terms of stoppages. We scored 54 points from stoppages, led by Gawney and Track. The pair between them had 17 clearances and 15 score involvements. That's just massive, isn't it? Like, particularly given Track, played so much of the time forward. We had the last 9 inside 50s, sort of indicative of the fact that we were really coming hard and they were flagging. Time in forward half was fascinating. Was for the match, it was 50-50. So time in forward half is really important for both teams, but particularly us. It was 50-50. It was that third quarter where they really got on top of, I think, for the first half. We really started getting it back on our terms in the second half of that third quarter. It was 60-40 their way in the third quarter. It was 50-50 in the second, and they just matched us in the first, 47-53. So really fascinating, I thought, from that perspective. The pressure points, our top 5 players in pressure acts, remembering you get them for corralling, points for corralling, closing acts, chasing acts, in terms of how this number's arrived at. Number 1, it won't surprise anyone, right on his season average for pressure points was Jack the Bull Viney, 54 points. Cozzy, 43 pressure points, right on his season average too, so fantastic performance from him pressure-wise. Gawney was 36. His season average is 22. What a performance from the skipper. Track was under his season average, but still the 4th most for this game. And Nibbler was also under his season average, but came in 5th with 35 pressure acts. Just some players who didn't put on enough pressure or were low on the pressure was, interestingly, Charlie Spargo was only 13. His season average is 24. Rui, who did not have a good match, it must be said, only 13 pressure points. His season average is a tick under 24. Bowser, similarly, way under his season average, almost half. His season average is 20.4. He can only 11. And Pets as well, similar, 20, 19.4 and 10. So, and the other one was Judd McVie, who has been remarkable that he's been able to play, every game so far, but he was way down the bottom of the table with only 9 pressure points, and his season average is 18. The pressure is really interesting. So it was very similar to the Carlton game. So the team pressure stats were The total for the match was 168 to 180. So they were 180, and reminder, 180 is considered AFL average and 200 is considered elite. In that last quarter, we were 174 on the pressure and they were 192. I thought that was really interesting because they're not high pressure numbers, and it sort of throws up this question about, how useful or indicative of those numbers are the pressure numbers. The pressure numbers for the Pies game was 183 to 186, and we topped 200, which again is a lead in the third quarter, and they 206 in the third quarter. And my sense of the pressure numbers is that it relates to how we played those two games and how those teams they played us. Comparing the Lions game with the King's Birthday game against the Pies, both games felt high pressure watching, but Friday night, it was more in the sense that pressure was a tense, enthralling contest with two genuine contenders. That was the pressure. But the Pies played differently. We played differently. The big difference in the two games was against the Pies, they played their game against us and ran at us the way they like to do, trying to chain their handballs until they find an outside kicker in space to take on that high-risk kick to the corridor or wherever that they like. And we responded to that method by denying them time and space, by having our defensive zone set high to create density, took the corridor away from them and to force them down the line. We really got up in their grill when the Pies went forward with the ball with frontal pressure. That by that I mean the players ahead of the ball peeling off and running at the player with the ball. And we really sweated on their mids and flankers sitting on the outside waiting for the ball to fed out. So the pressure, when you look at the pressure stats, as I noted where they're from before, from corralling and chasing, those sorts of things come into play in that game against the Pies. But against the Lions and the Blues, we didn't press up nearly as aggressively. We didn't apply the same level of frontal pressure, and our zone wasn't set as high, so there wasn't as much density and congestion and the ball in the contest. So the Lions came out with a plan to use the width of the G to move our defensive zone around, and I think that was really, really effective in the second and third quarter to pull Lever and May apart and to minimise their intercepting ability and to expose both of them one-on-one. So that was really effective. But to that end, they switched more than any team against us. The Saints did a little bit, but more than any team that I can recall since the first half of last season when teams were trying to deny us the ball. And we let them do so, but we never really pressed up in their face. We never really got up until the last quarter, but by that time we were dominating. They stopped switching in the last. The Blues did something similar and we let them. Because I think they couldn't get through our zone going in the straight line in the Blues case. I think that feels less pressure because the ball is, going side to side and we're not pushing up on them. So with the ball getting switched, there's just fewer opportunities to aggregate those pressure points because there's less corralling, closing acts and chasing acts and obviously less contests. So, in the first quarter and the last quarter, the ball's in motion, we went fast. And that creates that space around the ball. But and that's how the Pies like to play. But unlike the Pies, the Lions didn't really look to deny space, and so we didn't really look to deny them space by pressing up. So I think that's really interesting in terms of that pressure. And I think that was the difference. We sat off them a fair bit. Just a couple of other stats. Where was it? The stat on top four versus top four. So after this round, I really think there's only four contenders. I think the Cats can do some damage, but it's just difficult to win it from outside top four. I think there's a gap. If you take Cats out of it, a significant gap. I've been sort of talking about that for ages. Port against other top four contenders. Port have played 2-1. They're 2-1. The Lions are 2-2. The Pies are 1-2. So we beat them, the Lions beat them, and the D's are 2-2. If on Friday night, if Port win that game and Pies lose, they'll fall to 1-3 against the other contenders. So it really, of course, if they win, they'll go 2-2. But the 2 is power twice. They haven't beaten us. So I thought that's really interesting. And just one final thing, Andy, if you will. Sorry, George. I've talked about this before. Where I'm sitting, I can see the interchange bench. And I really thought that, the game played out very much how I thought it would be in terms of the approach we took and looking to go fast, looking to create space. And on the board that sits in front of the players, it's got messages, and I'm presuming these are key things coming into the match. Against the Pies, the board said, and I can't read it all because some of it's red and you can't read it from a distance, and some of it's not. So against the Pies, the messages that the players were seeing sitting in as they sat down on the interchange bench was score, aggressive positioning, connection/rolls, density, explode, ball in motion, chase, come forward. And that picks up those things that I was talking about in terms of getting up in their grill, that frontal pressure, denying Collingwood time in space. But in this game, that was this game. What am I saying? So that was this game. Score, aggressive positioning, connection, rolls, density. The Collingwood game was stoppage, blitz rolls, embrace the corridor, calm, challenge, and forward momentum. So really fascinating, the sort of messaging to the players. Expected scores, unexpected scores, that was really interesting. We 29 points more than expected in this match. And that's our equal best performance of the year in terms of scoring more than the expected score. And it's only been bettered by the Crows when they kicked 33 points more than expected in round 13 versus the Eagles. So that's enough stats from me.
All right, well, let's get into our listener questions part of the program. And our own Binman had a question in the podcast thread that he wanted to know. Binman says, where does that rank on the best home and away wins list? And Denox answered, at the very least, it's the best win since round 23, 2021. Gone after the siren to beat Geelong at KP by 4 points. Jabroni chipped in with, I still think Geelong 2021 and West Coast 2018 are slightly ahead in my humble opinion. Oh My D's claims, in terms of amazing games I've seen live in no particular order, Eagles versus Demons, round 22 in 2018. Queen's Birthday versus the Pies in 2017. Qualifying final versus Carlton in 2000 and elimination final versus Saints in 2006. This game was certainly up there with the King's Birthday game this season. Demon WA love the come from behind win against the Dockers too, the Austin Wanamiri game. El Diablo 14 says, what about versus the Cats elimination final 2018? Also the game versus Carlton last season with Cozzie's goals. And all of those games that our Demonlanders listed were incredible. It's hard to go past the round 23, 2021, when we not only came back from 42 points down against the Cats to win after the siren, but we claimed the minor premiership as well in that game. And I was at the round 22 Eagles win in 2018 when we clinched our first finals berth in 12 years. So that was a special win. The Tom McDonald match winner against the Eagles in 2017 in Perth was also pretty special. Cozzie's match winner against the Blues last year was great because I have so many Carlton mates and breaking their hearts is an important pastime of mine. King's Birthday this season was special as well, but this week certainly ranks up there. It's always great to win a game at the death knell. Not great for the ticker, but winning by the narrowest of margins on a Friday night is a perfect setup for a great weekend. George, where does Friday night's win rank for you? And then you can go, Bimman.
It was certainly a great win. I'll go a little bit left field here. All those games that you just mentioned, except for one, are in recent years when we've actually had a decent side and we've beaten someone at the death knell, so to speak. But in terms of sheer excitement, I'll go for my second best one, which was round 13, 2014, when Christian Salem kicked the goal after the siren very early on in Paul Roos's career. We were crap as a side in those days, and to win that game was the start of actually probably where we are today. But my most favourite one was mentioned by Demon WA, which was round 7 in 2008, when we were 51 points down against Fremantle, and we were more than crap in those days. We were appalling, and we came back from 51 points down to win that game. So, yeah, the crowd went absolutely berserk in that game as well, in a similar sort of manner to what they did on Friday night with this, but slightly different, from when we have expectations of being able to win versus no expectations in those two games.
Well, before you go, big man, I will mention, totally remiss of me to mention this, but I was at the Whitten Oval in 1987, round 22, when we made the finals for the first time in 23 years at the time. So add that one to my list. Big man.
Yeah, well, in terms of significance, I think I agree with Jabroni, Geelong 21. I mean, it's hard to go past, and it was thrilling, even though we couldn't be there. But to watch that on television, that was some sort of win, wasn't it? That was amazing. But I'd like you, Andy. I mean, for me, I'd add the final game of the 87 home and away season against the Dogs to give Robbie his chance of playing finals. And that game, for me, stands alone as the greatest game I'll ever see, the most important game, the highest stakes, and it will never be topped for me. I mean, just everything, the drama, the significance of do it for Robbie, the game itself, the wait for the Hawks Cats result.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's right. The Hawks Cat results.
The vibe of these fans huddled together, listening to that game on their radios,
on the wireless,
on standing at Whitten Oval. And I tell you, when Whitten Oval in '87 felt pretty foreign to me, I have to say, although now I live not far from it. And of course, like what it meant for Robbie. I mean, he's the only hero really I've ever had in my life, and for him to play finals was such a special day. So that one stands alone, but it's right up there with the Dockers win. I was at that game with my son. It's the last game my son has seen the D's play. I thought it was 45 points, but 51 points is even more impressive, and that was definitely a ray of sunshine in a very bleak period. I thought the Blues game last year was awesome, like Cozzie's goal. That was like a thrilling win. I really have a fond memories of the Queen's birthday game, I think 2017, with one of my all-time favourite Ds, Watsy, kicking that beautiful goal with I still in my mind's eye hear the Titanic theme song as he's coming down that the now Shane Warne wing. That was fantastic, and back into that gave us some hope that despite it, we're running out of gas, that we could get back to our best at that time. So. I thought it was fantastic, but I think just briefly on this win, I reckon it'll get overlooked, but they had a 28-point lead in the third quarter, so if I recall something like that, and then we scored a goal to make it 22, and they scored again to get out to 26 or 27. We scored once more in the third, but then when Danaher got the first in the last, it made a 26-point lead again. So people will think about us coming back, and normally when teams run down a lead, say a 5-goal deficit, the margin doesn't yo-yo. They get on a run and that momentum, and they go through it. But we came back 4 times, because even it must have been deflating for Danaher to give that goal up, and it was you could argue that wasn't a free, but Maisie didn't have a great last quarter. He also coughed up a very bad turnover. So to come back 3-4 times, I thought it was even more impressive. So it was a super, super impressive win. There's no doubt about
it. Thinking back to the round 22 1987 game, having to huddle around the wireless, kids today with their internet and knowing exactly, and I use it too, exactly how much time there's left. We knew exactly how much time there was when Melksham kicked that goal. But back in those days, you did not know when the game was going to end. No one knew really. So the kids today have no idea.
And in the match on Friday night, as I can see that video screen that I mentioned, but I can also see the clock that faces the players. So I had my binoculars trained on that clock for the last 3-4 minutes. Pretty hard. I was pretty focused on that clock, that's for sure.
Well, you don't have to strain your eyes, big man. You can use your phone.
But then I'd have to take my the game.
Supreme Demon wants to know, was that Jake Melksham's best game for the Demons? Scroll adds, Jake Melksham was the definition of clutch. The mark and the goal, nerves of steel. I could barely bring myself to watch the shot on goal. I would love to get the panel's thoughts on him and his role going forward. Obviously, he remains in the side whilst Fritsch is recovering from his foot injury, and this might be too soon to call whilst we're basking in the sweet glow of his match winner, but does he have a role to play once Fritschie returns? Hoof-hearted asks George, do you think Melksham justified his place in the team this week, or were his 2 goals still typical Melksham cheapies out the back, Joe the Goose style, with no defensive running involved? Dale on Twitter adds, incisive report, George, referring to George's match report that I posted. Hopefully your view on Jake Melksham has now changed. He's our best mark in the forward line and clutch goal scorer. Think he won us the match against the Blues last year by tapping the ball out to Cozzy. So, George, Hoof-Hearted has taken a bit of a dig at you, your view on Melksham. Dale on Twitter has perhaps asked the same question, but in a nicer way. I will admit that early in the match, I was cursing the incredible Melk with some of his disposal, but I was absolutely the president of his fan club as I was leaving the G. So forgive me, Jake, for I do not know what I'm doing. George, you've been critical of Jake in the past. Have your views softened in any way now that he is the hero of the MCG?
I wouldn't say softened is the word. This is what we wanted to see from Jake Melksham in this particular game, and he gave us plenty of good examples of it. The first quarter wasn't great, as you've just alluded to, but what really I thought was important in this game was he wasn't playing out the back looking for the cheapies in this game. He was moving a long way up the ground. He also had been given an obvious role to hold Harris Andrews to account. Yeah. Which was absolutely critical. Andrews only got 150 metres gained in the whole game. So to deny the intercepting that Harris is so famous for was a critical factor. So he's playing more of a team game. But even if you look at that in those last four goals, the first one came from Pickett when he goaled, but people forget down at the wing, which we haven't seen Melksham move that far up the ground. He took a contested mark that was against two players, which is absolutely critical to be able to get the ball to Pickett, who eventually got the goal.
It was a fantastic mark. That was a good mark.
Yep, it was a great one. The second one, he was leading into the pocket, a strong lead into the pocket, and then jagged it around the corner.
Can I just say, George, on both of them, that kick that you mentioned to Pickett was a beautiful kick as well after he took that contested mark. And that pass to him was from Maxi. And that was a beautiful kick to spot him up in the pocket. Yeah,
but Melksham had to run to get to that position, which was the critical thing. That's a complete change from what he's been doing even the previous week against St Kilda. It was hanging back, hoping that it came over the back and things like that. And finally, the last one was almost a repeat of that, a heavy, strong lead out into the available where the ball was being directed, a heavy contested mark yet again. It's exactly what we have wanted him to be doing, and that sort of performance will guarantee him, as we're heading towards finals, a spot. If all he's got to do is keep doing exactly that. There was one last thing that I'd mention. Greg Stafford was interviewed in one of the post-game videos, and he was talking about Petracca, and he said, "Don't you love it when players work hard and get reward?" And that was exactly what I thought should apply to Melksham. This was a game where he really worked hard and he got the rewards. Everybody pats him on the back, rightly so, for that last goal, but there was a lot more hard work went on before that to either score himself or cause others to put the score on the board. It was a great effort all round.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, George. And one of the really nice things about listening to the media, it was the interviews with Jake afterwards. And he hasn't been interviewed for a while, not in the same way, obviously, you interview the hero if you can. But he was asked several times about, well, how has it been for the last 2 or 3 years playing at VFL level? Obviously he thinks he's a, competitive athlete who one guesses he thinks he's best 22 and should be in there. But, he talked about the energy that is down at Casey, his leadership at Casey, the work he's had to do to take his chances. It was really fantastic to hear him talk about that way and really emphasise the whole of club focus. So, that was really impressive. I think, though, he's heroics with winning us the game, and those 2 marks that you mentioned, George, and the 2 beautiful goals that he kicked. Obviously, that gets deserved attention, but your point's a super important one about his role on Andrews. And I said last week that he will be critical, and it's becoming more and more critical in footy to deny the opposition intercept marks. They did a good job with us denying our intercept marks by stretching us the way they did. But Andrews did not have a intercept mark in the first half. And I think he ended up with something like 3. One of them was late. One of them where he pushed under Melksham, or Melksham was behind, I think, on the members' wing. But that's super impressive, and I think that role on Andrews was as important in terms of us winning that game as his match winner, in the sense that that's so important to the way they bounce off half-back flank, which is a little bit concerning because they still scored 50 points from their back half. But I think that's a lot to do with how we played that game, and we allowed them a lot of those kicks and didn't press up on them. So fantastic performance from Melk, and he's in the team. And I think what Goodies has shown over the time is he rewards players who in winning teams. It was terrific timing, great win, and well done, Melk.
Well, the follow-up questions we've got, Von asks, can we play Melksham and Fritsch together? D-Me adds, will Melksham be the unlucky one come September if Fritsch comes good in time? So, George, your thoughts on playing Fritsch and Melksham in the same side, particularly if we are already playing two talls like a Ben Brown and a JVR?
Too far away to give an exact answer.
Well, if Fritsch was coming back next week's maybe too soon to dump Melksham. But if in a couple of weeks Fritsch was back...
we'll talk about it later, but I think there are other people who will be going out at the moment. As long as Melk keeps playing like that, producing the results and working, he'll be in the side. So that's useful. But I think, like I said, we'll talk about it later, but there are others who are in more problematic areas.
All right, well,
and I think the advantage Melk's got now, and because this year it's even more important to find a way to minimise the impact of the opposition intercept marking, and he's clearly done a great job. Smith is a player who can play that role too, but he's not a natural defender, in the way I know that he's playing up forward, you know what I mean? But so that really gives him a point of difference over other players, I think. That ability to, Andrews is pretty tall. So ability to physically bump into, and he likes that contact. He's good in the air, but to keep someone of Andrews' height, and to intercept marks in the first half of footy, or no marks whatsoever, is super impressive. So whilst he's doing that, I reckon that's what they'll be looking for. Someone coming in will have to replace that ability.
If there was ever an incentive for him to be performing at this end of the season, 2021 was the example of that, where
exactly.
He knows there's only six rounds to go, and then potentially another premiership on the horizon if all goes well. If you want to be part of it, you better be performing, and he of all people should know that.
Yeah, and like you said, he worked hard, and there were a few times where in 21, he gave up on tackles. It was my criticism of him, not in this match. And so that speaks to a player who's got a fire in the belly and is going to be hard to get out of this team, and deservedly so.
Well, I guarantee you he won't kick one out intentionally on the full like he did in 2021 against Adelaide, I believe. So
I don't think he kicked it. He just kicked it, remember, up into the stands, and it was an automatic 50.
Yeah.
It was against the Crows on it.
Yeah. All right. Pew 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 says, Track's forays up forward have really paid off in the past 2 weeks. In the past 2 weeks combined, 8 goals, 2 points, 46 possessions, 26 contested, 8 marks, 9 tackles. Do you think we will see Petracca played in the same manner for the rest of the season in a dusty of old-like role? Supreme Demon adds, now with 8 goals from 2 games, if Christian Petracca can continue this incredible form, is he a smoky chance to win the Brownlow medal? From Facebook, In the Deep End says, so much talk about Nick Dacos. Can't dispute his clean hand speed and kicking accuracy, but after seeing Track this weekend and hearing T-Mac talk about him on SEN prior to the game, has anyone had that fleeting thought that he could win the Brownlow and the Coleman medal at some point? He's a beast in the contest. His goal-kicking demon has been unleashed, and he's a game changer. I feel that we still haven't seen his best yet. Oh My D's adds, did the panel notice how Petracca was being held, scragged at almost every stoppage in the second half? He ended up finally getting a free kick, but felt the umpires were happy to let this go on for far too long. Von says, Petracca must surely play at least 50% forward after the last fortnight too. Now I've got a voicemail from Nudge, so I'm going to play that now.
I just wanted to talk about Christian Petracca and what a weapon we've found in one, getting him back in that forward 50 mix, 2, getting his goal kicking confidence back, but most importantly, a weapon that we've created here, and we've got to give Goody credit. To have a weapon like Track armed and ready is a massive tool to have in our toolkit, something we didn't have a month ago. And to have Track realise his power and understand that he's basically untouchable, and to be able to pull that trigger whenever we want is massive. And
so, big man, Petracca was once again huge for us with another 4 goals. Our listeners have posed a lot of questions above there. It's a lot to unpack. Do you know what his forward and midfield split was this week? Can you see him playing a Dusty-like role for us? Is he a smoky for the Brownlow over your best mate, Nick Dacos?
No, Dacos, let's just give Dacos the Brownlow. Well, we can do two things. We can give the Pies the flag and Dacos the Brownlow at the same time. So he was amazing. He was fantastic. And what was wonderful to see is his energy. And so it told me, we're on the money when we talked about them being fresh in this game. You could tell by the way he was moving. Compare his movement, just the way he was running over the ground to 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's chalk and cheese. That goal he kicked where he played on, that was pure energy. Track. He shot from outside just on 50 where he played on, and I was right behind that goal when he flushed that kick. That was such a beautiful kick.
That was like his goal in the grand final, the first goal in the grand final. That was the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the energy, and also the way he turned to the crowd, and he also, like in that play, I don't know what the Lions player was. He went straight down to the Lions player, and the Lions are a very lippy team, and there's a fair level of animosity between us and them. And I just love it when he plays with that energy and that passion. And before the game, I mentioned a few weeks ago that there was a techno track playing, and it was another techno track. It was Domino by Oxia, but the Track had on pre-game as one of his choices. But he was fantastic. He is it's so easy to forget how good he is. His accurate kicking has been such a huge thing in terms of his set shot routine. That's all looking good. But I'm with George basically. The theme this year, if there's one theme from Goody, the one most consistent thing he's said so far is experimenting. And it's really interesting with the forward line. It sort of touches a little bit on what we'll talk about later in the media and their love of silly narratives. But as much as the media want black and white, let's fix it in now. As Goody has said in his presser, they don't need to make the decision about the final look of the forward line yet. He has been very clear that he is very happy to keep the forward line fluid. In fact, I don't know if you guys watched the presser, the post-match presser.
I have not.
Yeah.
I'd be interested, George, what your thought was. As I've said, it's not Goody's really improved his sort of confidence with the media and his media work, but it's not his strength. He doesn't like doing it. Clear. And so in this though, his emotion was high, and you could tell when you were watching it. And so he struggled, I think, a little bit to mask his frustration with the media. He noted a couple of times there was something in there about the point, 100 points plus. He's saying to the media, is that okay? We scored okay, 103 points. And another one of this, and he pushed back hard on, well, shouldn't you have your forward line fixed by now? It's a media narrative. It's not Goody's narrative. And what Goody said is no. He said there's plenty of time. There's weeks and weeks and weeks. There's 6 more games and then the finals. And this is Goody's point, is that it's all about that final act. It's about the finals. It's about your best 22 come the finals. The same deal with the whole narrative about Grundy. It's all about your best 22 on grand final day, not now. And so he doesn't have to make any decisions. I think there's a real strength in what he's doing because he's creating a challenge for the opposition. So great, sure, we lock in our forward line now. The opposition have got 7-8 weeks to go to school on what we do. He's made it clear. He's happy to keep the forward line fluid. Where that leaves Track, I don't know, but I thought it was incredibly brave. Goody doesn't get enough credit for his coaching. It's a bugbear of mine ever since he joined Melbourne. The confidence to keep Track forward in this game and allow Viney, Oliver and JJ and Brayshaw, not Oliver, Sparrow, to take the reins in the middle is amazing. Like, that shows such confidence in your young players, but it tells your young players, you know what? You guys are up to this. You guys in a big match, third versus fourth, we're going to place our trust in you, JJ, who's just back in the team. We're going to place our trust in you, Captain Jack, and of course, Viney was huge. That doesn't work. Track's not playing any minutes. He's going back into the middle. So any minutes up forward, he's playing back in the middle. So, but just on Track is, just on a selfish level, I love him playing forward, because you love to see players kick goals. You love to see his emotion when he kicks goals. And one-on-one, how many players are better than him one-on-one against almost anyone? So if we can move the ball quick to a Track inside 50, it is 100% a weapon. So, going forward, I'd be happy for a 50-50 split, 40 forward, 60 forward, whatever it looked like. But, he's just an awesome player, one of my all-time favourites as well. And he was awesome in this game, wasn't he?
It just gives us so many more options that this was the first time that we've actually, in ages, that we've had two tall forwards in there, and we still put Track up there as well. And, as you mentioned, the opposition coaches to be really worried in a couple of weeks' time with, all the dominoes falling into place. We'll have a T-Mac available, a Fritsch available, and we've got a Track available to go into the forward line because he's not as needed in the middle as what he has before. The opposition can't plan for any of that. And when you get to finals, you finish up in a situation like Richmond did, probably in, I can't remember the 2 years, probably 17, 18. I've always said that Dustin Martin on his own won 2 of those premierships on his own boot. Absolutely, and that's what was demanded in grand finals. We've got a player of that equivalent capability, like Martin was in those days, to be able to make those last-minute changes and win matches.
And I reckon, George, a key word you just said is options. And so that's behind keeping them fluid. Let's say Track does go back to playing more midfield with resting up forward for the last 3 or 4 games of the season. First final we win. Prelim final day, he hasn't played in weeks up forward. The opposition coach is game planning him going forward because he knows the damage that he can do in this period of time. So it's, not only is it creating options now, it creates a seed of doubt in the opposition coaches. What do we do if they push Track forward? Who mans him up? What does that mean to our setup if if we have to run someone hard on Track up forward? So I think it just gives us another ace up the sleeve, and I'd be happy for him to be 70% forward if we get a result like that.
A few minutes ago, I sort of asked what happens when Fritsch and Melksham in the team, and you didn't want to. None of you wanted to forecast that forward. You're already talking preliminaries and grand finals. All right.
More I mean by that is that Goody's saying is he's not set on it. So I think there is. Best 22 will either be BB in the team, Fritsch in the team, Melk, and so I think he likes the 2 tall setups. And we'll talk about Grundy later, but I see Grundy coming back into the team as well. Again, that provides some flexibility. You don't have to have Track as a forward in that setup. You can just run him into the forward line, name him as a midfielder, and he pushes forward.
Mandalorian says, our leaders were huge in the last and dragged us over the line. Gawn was back to being Gawn. Melky was clutch, and our bulls in Viney and Petracca had massive impact. Getting lost in all the emotion of the incredible victory is the work of Gus. I thought he was excellent and he was involved heavily in some important stoppages. He's been impactful since his return to the midfield in the absence of Clayton Oliver and back to playing some of his best footy in 2023 after a quiet and unmemorable start to the season. He was great on the wing in 2021. He was superb in defence in 2022. When Clary inevitably returns, where do you see Gus playing and what is his best role for the club going forward? Sorry for the long question. Love the podcast. George, Gus was really impactful at the stoppages this week. 29 possessions and 5 clearances, including the match-winning clearance from the stoppage that resulted in the clutch goal from Melksham. Obviously, he's going to remain in the middle for the next few weeks. Do you see him returning to defence when Clary returns, or is he a lock for more midfield time?
I think I said this last week. I love Gus, and I'm sure Goody loves him even more because he gives him options. Gus can play virtually anywhere in the team. If somebody goes down or somebody gets injured, he can fill the hole. but he's playing fantastic football, playing in the middle again after such a long period away from it. He's a real grunt player. He was able to get the ball out numerous times and just get it on the boot, just get it forward, get the territory, and that's what the game is all about these days. It's all about territory. Not taking anything away from Viney. Viney was absolutely superb in a similar sort of way, but if Gus was unable to do that, we probably would see Petracca coming back, and there's a flow into the middle, and we'd see flow-on effects. But Gus is holding up his end of the bargain. Likewise, players like Sparrow and JJ have holding up their end of the bargain as well. It just gives us so many more options. And again, the opposition coaches, as they're going into the finals, they'll be going, who in the hell do we put on? Name the Melbourne player in this spot. Because we just don't know what they're going to do in this game, be it a Petracca, be it an Oliver, be it a Brayshaw, be it a Sparrow, be it a Viney, be it a JJ. We're just developing options to be able to use them at the pointy end of the season.
He was fantastic in this game, and again, it goes back to my point about if he didn't play to the level he played at, then what do you do with Track? You take him away from the forward line. Maybe we lose that game. I thought it was really clever coaching again. Goody doesn't get a huge amount of credit for it, but JJ sat on Neil, really limited his impact. Again, it's sort of players need to play their role, because if JJ isn't able to contain Neil, that means they've got to look at maybe something different with Gus, and maybe Gus goes to Neil. But because JJ did the job on Neil, Gus can then play more as a pure mid. I thought his guts and determination was fantastic in this match. Personally, when Clary's back, I feel like I really think that Gus's best position is in that back 7, back 8 rotation, and with some targeted midfield minutes, maybe giving some chop out. I just think that falling back and intercept marking and filling a hole in defence, he's really good at reading the play. And I think it was one of the factors in their, our inability to really put a slowdown on their scoring in that second and third quarter, is not having that defensive role of Gus playing that more defensive role. But yeah, his performance was fantastic. And just on that options comment, George, I think one of the great things about Goody this year is that he's really gone to town on what Collingwood have done and their game plan. He's talked about their fast ball movement, and but the other thing, he's really gone to town on what the Cats did last year. And in many ways, as I've said before, we're replicating what the Cats did. And one of the things the Cats did is roll lots of players through the midfield. And last year I'm talking about, and we're doing the same thing. And exactly as I said, it creates options, but it also means that you roll Gus through the midfield in a big game later in the season, for instance. He's got this experience in his memory of playing super well in a big game against a really good team. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it, George, in terms of options, because there's options in the midfield. We've even got some options defensively. Wowie adds another element, and we're, as we talked about, lots of options up forward as well. And by the way, just on the midfield, it was great to see Cozzy start in the midfield, wasn't it? And he got that first clearance and that energy he brings. Again, smart coaching.
Singer says, what a Herculean effort from Max Gawn. I read that it was the highest ranked game of his career, 29 disposals, 21 contested, 39 hit-outs, 17 hit-outs to advantage, 10 clearances, 7 tackles and 1 goal. It can't be a coincidence that his return to form coincided with Brodie Grundy's axing. Can I get the panel's thoughts on the dropping of Brodie Grundy and what that means for him in 2023? And also, if Max is to go solo for the next few weeks, how do we manage that in terms of Max's career longevity? I don't want to burn Rui out by playing him second ruck so early in his career. Rue Beauty adds, a lot being said in the media that the Grundy-Gawn experiment hasn't worked, and some even saying Gawn will be at Grundy will be at another club next year, which is just hilarious. In my humble opinion, Grundy was brought in to share the ruck load, as Big Maxi was clearly burnt out towards the end of last year. And also, in a case of an injury to Max, we'd still have an All-Australian ruckman in the team, as was the case in round 2 against Brisbane. This year, Max has a partner in crime to help out, meaning he's stayed fresher and ready to explode in the final third of the season, Exhibit A Friday night. Whether Grundy can develop as a forward, only time will tell. Can't see it personally, but at least it will keep the pressure on Brown and JVR to perform each week. I can see Grundy coming back into the team in a few weeks' time to give Maxi a chop out again just before finals. Rivers Run Reds adds, gents, is everyone looking at the Grundy situation wrong? This time last year, Gawn was cooked. We get bundled out of the finals with Gawn looking very tired. Fast forward to 2023 and we witnessed that game from Gawn. We are looking at finals with the AFL's number 1 ruck fit and firing and a top 4 finish. Should we stop looking at it as a dual ruck setup and more of a support act, albeit a quite expensive investment, and a view to a replacement for Gawn in 3 to 4 years where we will still have Track Oliver in prime and the next tier coming through? D-Me says, Gawn was able to play how he did because of Grundy's effort throughout the year. Nudge says, the Grundy narrative is just as moronic and delivered with false temerity that I'm at a loss to even begin to challenge it. Such is the lunacy and lack of common sense in some of the commentary. Grundy is not going anywhere. He will play finals and the last 2 to 3 home and away games, as it's all sort of the bigger picture, folks, and shows the homogeny of the club. Now, Big Man, were you surprised with the bombshell of dropping Brodie Grundy? Specifically, the reason we were given that it was to hone his forward craft. There was a lot of talk in the media regarding this controversy. What are your thoughts on it, particularly in terms of how Max played as the solo ruck and what it means to Brodie and I guess to Max Gawn's longevity this year and in the future?
Well, I mean, I don't know where to begin with Grundy. I mean, really, it's much ado about nothing, really. The biggest nothing burger I can ever call. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'll probably leave my angst to the media a bit later in terms of the reporting on it. But we talked about it last week that he looked like he was tired and needed to chop out. I don't care what I think the way the club did it. Personally, I think there's some challenges at the club around comms and communication. Maybe it's an area where the soft salary cap is hit. I don't know. To me, the messaging was about don't expect him back 2 or 3 weeks to keep the pressure off the situation. So there's not a weekly, will he come back? He looked, to me, it's as much about managing him, giving him a chop out right now. Could he made it crystal clear, and he's spot on really that big men in finals, you really need your big men in finals. So to me, there's no doubt that he's going to come back. I think Rivers Run Reds just nailed it. That it's really, I don't understand what the confusion is. Really, we had Jackson playing that role last year. We brought in Grundy. He's going to play the same role that Jackson did last year. I think what we've become clear is that we need Maxi in the ruck 70% of the time because that's where he plays his best footy when he's dominating. Unfortunately, so does Grundy, but Max is a once-in-a-generation player. So if you're going to choose between the two of them and you want to maximise the output of Max, then you run with him 70%. To be honest, Grundy going forward, all he needs to do is compete and take on, bring the ball to ground. He doesn't need to learn, he's not, what's he going to do, go back for 3 weeks and suddenly be a gun forward? People seem to forget that JVR was also sent back and no one talked about him being managed. He was sent back to work on his deficiencies, right? Back to Casey, but it was clearly also being managed. Clearly, he's a young kid needing a chop out. Grundy looked like, in the Saints game, looked like he had lead in his boots. He was, we talked about it last week. He looked tired. He looks like he needs a chop out. Now, they drop him the week that they haven't even got a game at Casey, so have to do a 14v14 practice match. And come on, of course, they're, looking for the end of the season. So I thought, again, the comments from Goody were really instructive in that presser. And if anyone listening hasn't heard the presser, post-match presser, I really urge you to listen to it because his emotion, he is really clear what he's saying because there's no pretense about, you can really see his emotion in that, in his expression and how he's talking, Goody. The flag that, I think that's smart. The flag that he's going to be at Casey for a couple of weeks so he can go back. JVR can have some time in the ones, who, by the way, JVR kicked some goals in Casey, but didn't really, George would probably be better to comment on this, but to my eye, didn't really, he didn't demand his spot back in the ones. He didn't have such a good run in the Casey that there was no question he'd have to be brought back. BB can have a good run in the ones as well. Maxi can concentrate on his game and get his game up and running. Maybe even manage him at some point. For example, swap him with Brody for the Roos game so he doesn't have to travel. Let Brody do the full-time rucking and see what things look like in 2 or 3 weeks. It's, as I said before, it's about the big dance, not playing the Tigers in July. But, on that sort of question about JVR versus Grundy, if it were one or the other that had to be chosen, Goody makes a really good point, as I mentioned before, about the importance of big men in finals, big senior players. And to be honest, I think we saw on Friday night that JVR still got a fair bit of development to go, both in terms of his strength, his build, his tank, but also his forward craft. He didn't have a good game. He did some good things in the ruck, but he was up against Danaher, who's next to useless as a ruckman. But he did all right. But he had, his pressure was down. He didn't score. He didn't barely take a mark, and had 5 or 6 possessions. So the question I would have for if that game, it's a bit like I was talking about the Geelong game. If that was a 100% must-win game, and we had to win that game on Friday night, Andy, do you think JVR would have been selected ahead of Grundy?
I don't know. I think Grundy was carrying a bit of an injury as well, so I think there was a bit of that.
Well, let's say Grundy was fit and fine. Let's say finals, like
perhaps.
George?
I would have JVR there.
They had a Grundy. Well, we'll see. I mean, yep. But what Goody's flagged is that Grundy's coming back into the team. Uze said the same thing. Max has said the same thing twice. I've heard multiple people from the club, which is why the messaging was a bit muddled. They should have said, he's going to go back, work on the craft, but he's going to come back in. And eventually they got round to saying it. Maxi said it, and as I said, Uze said it twice. I've heard Maxi and Goody said it in his presser. So whoever the forward line mix is, he's going to come back into that team. And I agree, he'll play. The other thing about this idea of whether it's been a failure, what a joke. I mean, maybe for him personally, Brody, if he feels like he's hard done by and he's not getting the deal, but he would have known. I mean, it's football. It's a professional elite sport. He wasn't guaranteed midfield minutes or ruck time, I'm guessing. That's what they would have pitched to him. But if he ends up playing 30% ruck and, he won't mind if he gets a premiership medal. So, and the other thing is from a club perspective, I mean, I've heard people say, oh, well, we gave up too much for him. That's ridiculous. I mean, clearly we can fit him in our salary cap. Collingwood are playing part of his salary in any case, and it's going to be forgotten. But he was critical when Maxi didn't play for how many weeks? 3 or 4 games?
Yeah, 4 games.
We had an All-Australian who could come in and ruck and replace Max for those weeks. We won those 3 games. We might not have won those 3 games if not for that. So it's already paid off in spades, forgetting the fact that, he's for the next 2 or 3 years, he's going to absorb some of that physical pressure that Maxi would have otherwise So it's for the same reason, it was smart to get Bruce, even though Bruce didn't end up playing any thingos, hardly any games. So, yeah, it's the biggest nothing burger. It's the biggest load of rubbish that I've heard for many a year.
I also have to agree thoroughly with Rivers Run Red. He was sent back simply because he was cooked after that St Kilda game. I was watching him from my location. He could barely move after the game. He was completely cooked.
He didn't look happy, did he?
No. He was really, really struggling. He'd played all the games up to that point, saved us in the absence of Max. I thought it was just appalling messaging coming back from the club, to say, oh, you've got to go back and learn your forward craft. What an absolute load of rubbish. How are you going to teach someone forward craft in the space of 2 weeks?
Well, and also it says, well, what key indicators, what would success look like? How would you come back into the team? It's
they should have just come out and did exactly what Geelong did the last year. Rested.
Yeah, just say managed. I don't understand. That's the whole thing. I don't understand. They made a point of even writing omitted. Just say managed and just say he's been managed for a couple of weeks. He's a bit sore, and that's it.
I think, though, the logic might have been if they say managed, then each week there's pressure. So
say
I don't think he's going to come in this week,
soreness.
and I don't think he'll come in next week.
Let's put him out with soreness. General soreness.
There's plenty of other communication that can be made other than saying he has to go back on forward craft, because that, as it's happened, has just opened up a whole different can of worms. I'm reminded, because I'm old, of Joe Bielke-Peterson, who used to talk about the media as feeding the chooks. Well, the Chooks picked up the crumbs this week and ran with it.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
Someone leaks something. I don't think the club themselves leaked that. That got leaked out, and then we were on the back.
He
we were
probably
on the
got told
back
he
foot.
wasn't going to be playing, and then that leaked out. But they could have just said they're going back to learn the forward system. Our system. We're going to teach him our system because we want him to play out forward.
The sad part is, and I saw this pre-season, Brodie's not actually a good runner. He's
not fast. He's a good. He can keep running.
He can keep running, but he's actually not a good runner. So you've got to be able to accelerate quickly as a forward, and he simply can't do that. He can keep running, but his leg doesn't extend out totally when he's running. It's a bit strange, but have a look at it if you do ever get a chance. But as a forward, you've got to be able to sprint and get off to a very fast sprint very quickly to be able to lead. And he's not forward. So, is not to do that. You go, well, what's he being sent back there for? To
get a chop out.
A chop out.
And also, though, it wasn't just to give him a chop out. It was actually really clever coaching by Goody because, one, to give Gawn a full run at it, but two, they obviously went into this match with a decision strategically that it was a good match to have one ruck because Max, he is one out. He's a bloody good ruckman, McInerney, and they always have good duels, but they've only got the one ruck.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So this was, we ever going to do it, this was the match, which is why... And then the weird thing about Casey having a bye.
That's where they shot themselves in the foot completely.
Yeah.
But I think you'll see him out this week for exactly the same reason. McInerney was the only ruck. Danaher's not a backup ruck. Against Adelaide, you've got O'Brien, who's the decent ruck, and their next one is Tilthorpe. Who again is not a backup ruck. He's not a prime ruck. So this is the game where you'll play Gawn again, and you'll play JVR as the backup ruck. So which means Grundy has another week off.
And he, by all accounts, 16 possessions or something in this scratch match. He kicked the goal, took 7 marks. Of course, it's a scratch match, but, better numbers than JVR did in the Lions game, different standard, of course. Funny messaging from the club, but geez, what a load of media.
Yeah,
it's like really. Let's
not get him started.
Let's get moving. Horny for Gawny, great name, says there's been lots of comments about who the most important player on this team is, and the consensus seems to be either May or Oliver. But is there any one as influential as a firing Max Gawn? Probably Christian Petracca. Deciding there, George. Is a firing Max Gawn our most influential player? We don't have to spend too much time on it.
No, it's we need a firing Max Gawn, we need a firing Christian Petracca, we need a firing Clayton Oliver. That's why you win premierships with those sort of players firing. But Max led by example in this game, and it was great to watch. And like I said, I enjoyed the 150-metre kick.
Personally, I think he's the most important player at Melbourne and has been for the last 6 or 7 years. And I think the most, if of any club, or maybe Nick Okos because there's so much love for him, but if you were to take out one player from any club, it would be Maxi in terms of the impact on our game. As much as Brodie was manful in that, when he was filling in for Maxi, it was a big drop-off, wasn't it, in terms of what he does around the ground. And this game was simply, his best game ever. I heard something like it's the best individual game on that ratings for ages.
I mentioned that before. That was his best.
No, the best of any
AFL
player.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And it's not that impressive, but I don't know the time frame. But it was a super impressive game, wasn't it? Incredible.
We'll just leave it as ever.
Yeah, ever.
I'll take that. Fact check for you, B Man. We didn't win all the games while Max was out. We lost to Essendon in the gather round.
I don't recall that.
I unfortunately do because I was sitting out in the rain. My D's says, love your thoughts on the last quarter of Trent Rivers, especially his toe poke and drive to win the ball to get it forward after the Viney goal. Trent Rivers, he's having a superb year. He's playing some of the best footy I've seen from him. He's playing with confidence and with flair. The last quarter toe poke, then the follow-up to grab possession and drive it long into the forward line was great. There was a similar classy bit of play where he sort of shimmied through a pack of players on the members' side of the ground. And I've commented on the podcast before that I see him as a 200-plus gamer, and I stand by that with every passing game that I see him play. Simon C. on Twitter says, I'm calling top 5 BNF finish, been great this year. He's currently 7th in the Demonland Player of the Year. Bin Man, your thoughts on Trent Rivers' game and his season to date?
He's been phenomenal. I love to see players improved, and he had a plateau season last year, and we know that he had some injuries. And as you and I saw him down at that Casey game against the Roos, he had that strapping pretty heavily. He's trimmed right down. The thing I'm really loving about his game this year that's taken it to another level is his intercept marking and his marking one-on-one. He really stretches up. He's got good hands. As we've talked about, a huge strength of his now is the depth he gets on his kick. So, he's what you wanted from a player like Hunty, really, who can get the ball, run 20 metres and then kick it 60 metres and, getting 80 metres down the field. That last play, I just could watch that, or, that last bit of play that he did that basically won us the game. So, of course, the kick from Melk was the thing people focus on, but geez, that was impressive. And I'll go back to the fitness team. They should deserve a huge pat on the back, because unless you are fit and fresh and running on top of the ground, he is not doing that. And he ran through them of the opposition because they weren't fit and fresh, or not as fit and fresh as us. That was just such a gutsy bit of play, but it's also, we were playing aggressively. It was in the corridor. He took the game on. Thrilling to watch, but that's done under the coach's direction. That's done under the whole system and their structure. That game, their mindset that they came into that game was clearly on offense. So we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it was really interesting. And I think that there was very little discussion about the fact we gave up over 100 points, because that's very un-Melbourne. And I think that goes partly to the mindset of the way we played and the way we responded to their attack. We allowed them to attack us more than we're going to allow, let's say, the Pies to attack us. But that really freed up Rivers, because that meant you can, have freedom to attack and be aggressive and, and to look to take ground and to run through the middle. He's becoming a super important player, and that prediction of top 5 in the Bluey, I reckon, spot on. I definitely have him in my top 5 most important players so far this season.
Titus Toddy says, just to comment, how good was Viney's goal that got us to 5 points? And that goal was just huge. He literally ripped the ball out of Oscar McInerney's hands. He willed the goal through. He's been immense in Oliver's absence, and with Petracca's move up forward, 25 possessions, 8 bone-crunching tackles, and that goal was just amazing, George.
That was an absolute ripper. He had no right whatsoever to get that ball. It was as simple as that. He's to take it off Oscar McInerney, who I think by that stage was actually cooked. But we won't take that away from Viney. He was in the middle of not just Oscar. There was a whole stack of other Brisbane players around him, and he just willed that through. And again, if that hadn't happened, we didn't need to worry about the Melk goal in a sense, because that gave us the real sniff that we needed, gave us the faith, kept that momentum going. That's how critical it was.
I had binoculars on that contest. And, unlike when we gave up against the Pies, that goal to Dacos, where it got fed out to him, there was no defensive problems on the Lions' perspective. They had all their outlet handball. The only way we were going to score a goal is exactly what happened, is Viney ripping it off the tallest man on the field and ripping it out, turning and kicking on his right foot. I was fair dinkum. I couldn't believe it. I could see it through my binoculars, and I watched it again on the replay. I was stunned. And then the thing about it, that it was still 2 minutes, 29 seconds on the clock after he kicked that or something like that. And I thought, right, we're on here. And often in footy, it seems like when teams come back from a margin and get close, the game suddenly stops and goes back to like a 50-50 contest, even if one team's coming hard. But partly is what you're saying, George. McInerney was looking cooked. They were looking cooked. We had the momentum, and I was so confident we were going to win that game. And from that point, I don't know. I just really, and I was really confident we were going to win it from about, I think they had the first 11 inside 50s up to about 8 minutes to go in the last quarter. They had 11 inside 50s in a row, the Lions. They were well on top, but you could feel it swing from that point on. So really, they'll talk, a lot of the talk about the last 7 minutes, but it's the last 6 or 7 minutes of the third quarter that were so critical because, like George said before, we wrested back the momentum and we never gave it up. Like we had, I think it was 2 scoring shots in the last quarter for 8-9, was it in the last quarter that we scored? We dominated that last quarter. That will be forgotten again because it took time for us they scored the first goal and it took time for us to actually get that momentum into scoring. But once we did, we looked like we're going to win that game a long way out, I thought. And really on Viney's goal was as much a match winner as anything else.
Roos 2 says, 1 point up, Viney clears from the centre bounce and kicks the ball in front of goals with 20 seconds left in the game. I kid you not, I'm getting nervous just typing this. JVR gains possession of the ball. It looked to me like he is about to have a shot, but instead decides to handball a little in front of him. Do you think that was tactical? Would they be instructed not to go for goal in case it's a point and the Lions gain possession? In answer to Bimman, the best home and away game win I've ever seen. Live, love the noise we all made. So initially when watching the replay, I couldn't for the life of me think, why didn't JVR just have a ping for goal? We could have won by 7 points. Get a bit of percentage. I don't know if we would have got any more percentage. And then upon rewatch, which I did many, many, many times, I came to that same conclusion that Roos 2 as perhaps it was really clever and we do train for that exact scenario, and the clever play would be not to give up possession, which ultimately happened anyway, but a kick out is to the opposition is a cleaner possession. So I'll give Rui the benefit of the doubt here that is the team thing. George, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's he intentionally didn't have a ping for goal because he could have and he had every right to?
Yeah, I utterly agree with Roos 2. And it was confirmed in Melksham's interview after the game where he talked about a plan to win the game in these circumstances. And that's exactly what you do. You do it in basketball, you don't give the opposition the ball. It's as simple as that for basketball. In AFL, it's the same sort of thing. You don't give the ball back to them. And it was fantastic to see for JVR, who's a 19-year-old kid,
a young
maybe
kid.
even 20. He's got that message. This is what you need to do. Don't try and kick the ball where you might not get the goal. You finish up with a point and you've given the ball back to them with 30 seconds to play. That's not what we want. Get it to the ground, maybe even fall on top of it, whatever you've got to do, but don't kick that ball forward. It was quite deliberate.
Great pickup for Roos 2, and I think you're spot on, George. And it was actually interestingly a point I was going to bring up this week is we are such a disciplined team, and even you watch how we man the mark. The discipline to man the mark, and when they run up, territories are super important. Is at the heart of our way we play footy. You watch next time we play, each player runs up to the mark, pointing at the ground, and they crib 2 or 3 meters doing it until the umpire tells them to stand, as opposed to other teams who seem to sort of just drift up to the mark and, often get caught out and have to go back 5 meters. I think your point, George, about a 19-year-old kid being aware of a situation and being able to go back to his the discipline to go back to what the coach's instruction in that last game save, I think they call it, or whatever Melksham was calling it, is so impressive. And that's why I bristle a little bit last week about Montagna criticising Cozzy for not being front and centre. He is clearly following instruction, protect the corridor against the Pies. He would have been dragged probably if he breaks the coach's instructions. It's role-playing and discipline and doing the right thing within your system is what wins big games. Exactly as you say, if he kicks a point, they have control of the ball. You can easily get the ball. Look how quickly, when I was watching it live, the replay, the commentators were talking about, the game's over, 12 seconds to go. it still almost got marked by the opposition on the half-forward flank. Hipwood, if he marked that ball, he's a big kick. He would have had a fair chance. It would have almost certainly been a draw. He would have, likely got a point, wouldn't he?
Yeah, because he would have been, but Lever would have been on the 50-metre line on the mark. And
exactly.
Could have easily roosted
it. If he had it swung around and been the hero but kicked the point, they easily could have brought the ball up the ground and given it up. So as George says, you don't give the ball back to the opposition.
Smurf says, thanks for taking my question last week. I'm really enjoying the podcast each week. How did you think our key forwards function this week? I wouldn't mind Benny Brown and Rui getting a few weeks more playing together. Big man, how did you see the functioning of our forward line this week? In particular, just the two key forwards. And I know you said Rui didn't do much. So what did you think of Benny Brown's game?
Look, I mean, maybe I'm a bit hard on Rui's numbers weren't great, but I guess, at the risk of, that's probably contradicts myself. He probably had a role. He was good in the rock and did that work. I thought Benny Brown was fantastic in the first quarter. It was really important. It's easy to forget he only kicked the one goal, but he gave up a Joe the Goose, the one that Spargo got.
That should have been two, yep.
And by the way, that play is exactly what I mean. It's exactly what I mean by when we increase the pace of the ball movement, suddenly there's space. When that kick, it was a 1 out. He was all by himself. He's the tallest forward we've got, and he was all by himself. That's because we moved the ball so quickly off half back. They couldn't get their defense back to cover that off. So I thought he was super impressive in that first quarter. Seems to me he's still got a bit of work building his tank because he's faded out. Badly. Well, not badly. He's faded out the last two games in the second half. But his athleticism looks really good. He's running well. He's never going to be the sort of player who bashes and crashes in the forward line. He's like an old school full forward who gets out on the lead. But once the game, on a day like that where it's good weather and we're moving the ball fast, there's space to him, there's leading lanes, there's space for him to work in. He's a really important player structurally for us. I thought the forward line, worked fantastic, but let's not sort of contradict ourselves as well in the sense that, our accuracy is what won us the game. So it was no more impressive than it was previously. It's just that we stuck the ball through the big sticks more often.
We had some follow-ups which talked about our forward line structure going forward, and we know that it's all fluid at the moment. I won't get into that because we've talked about our forward line makeup and what it's going to look like going forward, but I don't think we're going to gain anything by going over it again, so I'm crossing the line through that. So Bigfoot asks, what do you fellas think of using Joel Smith as our super sub, can slot in forward or back, and if a mid goes down, we have plenty of players that can roll through the middle? Or do we need to give him some more game minutes to see what he can bring to the table? George, your thoughts on Joel Smith as a super sub, and you might even talk about how we play when he did come on in defence in replace of Petty. George, you're on mute.
There we are. We're back. I think he'd make a great super sub because he is capable of playing both forward and back. The sub's there because someone has basically been injured or someone's really underperforming on the ground. The injuries are the great concern, and of course it happened exactly that way in this game. I think we already know what Joel can bring. He can do a little bit, but he's not a great football thinker. He gets caught out quite often, but he can compete in the air, so he's useful to us up forward and also down back. And a couple of times he had the opportunities and the need to be able to compete in the back line in Petty's absence, and he did very well at that.
Took a critical intercept mark.
Yeah, exactly. And it was almost like he knew that he had to do that those sort of things were required. I don't think he can maintain it during the whole length of the game. And if, as we suspect, we'll have a number of players coming back, his position will be under pressure. But yeah, I like him at as a sub at the moment. So I can't see much changing in the short term anyhow.
Yeah, I'm a huge, as you guys know, I'm a huge Smithy fan, but I don't hate to say it, but for Smithy's sake, I hate to say it, is that he's almost the ideal sub, isn't he? Because exactly as you say, he can play in so many different positions. He can cover off defense as he did. He's now Petty's personal sub. So that's 5 in a row he's come on for Petty. He can play up forward, as we know. He could, at a pinch, he could play through the middle. He could certainly go into that rotation off the half forward or even the half back flank. He could play wing. And the other thing he brings in is he's dynamic and his athleticism. He's quick off the mark. You bring that, he can not only cover off and say a Petty and play that role, he can also come into a game late and add something. I'd want to see him come forward as a tactical sub as opposed to because someone's injured.
We threw him forward late in the game as well.
Yeah, I didn't pick that up until actually I didn't realise that until Goody noted that exact same thing in the presser. So again, I should have a look at it, Andy. But I think he's the ideal sub, and it might be his way to get a premiership medal is to be that super sub. Is he's ideal. And look, he had a great impact in that game, and a couple of his marks in particular. One was really, really important. And he's a neat kick. He doesn't turn it over very often. So I'd love to see a scenario, say, next week, for instance, he plays as the sub. We take, say, a Spargo off or a Nibbler off in that last quarter, and he comes on and plays a slightly different role up forward and as a weapon and comes on and really makes an impact. Like George has often sort of said about the way they rest players to come on and come on in a real sort of suddenly there's a player fresh, but who's really dynamic, can do some damage. So, I think he really, that's an ideal player for that sub role.
Supreme Demon asks, will Judd McVie finally get that elusive Rising Star nomination this week? Well, you don't have to ask that question. He was awarded the Rising Star nomination this week, finally. And he certainly did deserve that nod for the collective work that he's done this season. Yeah, unfortunately, those nominating are probably more focused on possessions or goals or fantasy points in a particular week. And this kid just consistently, he's got time, composure, awareness. He plays at a level of hardness that belies his age and size. I just love him. He's a lock in this team. It took a while to get that Rising Star nomination, but I'm sure he's happy to just be a member of one of the best defences in the league and playing finals footy over getting pumped by 80 points every week. So well done, Judd McVie.
Did a job on Cameron too. Yep. That's exactly, Cameron is the player who's just given us nightmares, really. So, top job.
All right, let's get on. Demon WA has a statement to make about Bin Man's fatigue hypothesis and his predicting of our fast start to predict the match and then our ability to run the game out. And then I'll roll that into the question we had about our mid-game, for want of a better word, slump. Demon WA says, lately I can't help but view our games through the lens of the podcast discussions and specifically Bin Man's fatigue hypothesis. When we were 4 goals up before we had time to blink, I felt the same feeling of that son of a bitch is right. He actually censored the word, but I've said it. Reminiscent of when we belted Freo at Optus last year. Nostradamus, Bin Man, had called it from a long way out. The rest of the game obviously was a bit of a different story, but the way we ran out the game was a massive tick. After that game, it's hard not to be outwardly bullish about the rest of the season. Demon Saw says, love the podcast, 5 stars. Well, you got to do that in Apple Podcasts, mate. An amazing win. Max Finey personified incredible effort, skill, belief and leadership. We were clean and early on raced to a 4-goal lead and looked like we would run away with it. Brisbane, clearly a good side, eroded that lead by halftime before getting out to 28 points themselves several times. How did this 50-point swing happen and what do we need to improve in this middle period? Red Sox man agrees, saying, I would like to know your comments on how it was so easy in the second, third quarters for Brisbane to cut through our defence to score and so difficult in other quarters. Nairobi Demon adds, fantastic and important win. I'd be curious for the panel's thoughts on why and where we struggled in the third quarter. It seems we were beaten in the middle of the ground, were unable to move it forward, and that we were only able to swing the momentum when Petracca moved to the middle late in the quarter. Says, for the first 15 minutes or so, Brisbane could not penetrate our zone, but once they worked it out, they sliced through with relative ease until the final 15 minutes. What changed? I got a bit to play from Nudge. So here we go.
Good morning, gentlemen. Nudge here. Couldn't help myself. I had to call in. I'm well and truly in work mode at the moment. But I'm going to do my best to articulate my point. Really enjoying the podcast this year, guys. You're doing a bang-up job. Really professional, on point, and as Bin Man alludes to quite frequently, far superior to anything in the mainstream media at the moment. The week-to-week by is laughable. Evidenced by Buckley this morning. When Kane Corns is the voice of reason, you know things are going bad. Speaking of bad, I can only imagine the diatribe laden rhetoric that would have been flowing through Demon Land throughout the game, especially in that third quarter, early last quarter, following the Danaher goal, which is where I start my points. The Lions played absolute brutal slice and dice football in that second and third quarter. In fact, in my decades-long quest of watching a lot of football and playing a fair bit of it, I've never seen a team kick like that in my life. It was absolutely brutal. And this is what, during the game, made me feel quite okay about what was happening, because that's not the type of football that's sustainable. And it's certainly not a finals brand of football, which, came to the fore even in this game. There was a moment in that last quarter where I could tell something was happening. Stephen May's pushing the side of Danaher and the ludicrous free kick and goal that followed. Stephen May's body language was absolutely distraught. And that was when I knew the players had genuine belief that they could win this game. As I said, Brisbane's style of play was unsustainable. The Hipwood goal, the Bailey goal, all extremely momentum-based and focused. And I think the boys knew that. And I think we're seeing the fitness regime really come to the fore, a la 2021. And from that May moment, I had a feeling that something was happening. Brand on show in that last 12 to 14 minutes was absolutely what Goodwin's trying to achieve with this team. The first 10 minutes was the same. This is what conversion can do in kicking straight. Ben Brown effect, contest, bring the ball to ground, take the ball at its highest point. Should have had a couple, but competes really hard, leads up the ground, which creates a vacuum. And this is what Goodwin's trying to achieve, that vacuum and the pace on the outside. Grundy's not done. He's 100% going to play finals. They just want to figure out and get him some craft so he's has more of an impact. Petracca's power's back in the legs. You can see it. He's taking on contests. He knows no one can touch him. He knows he's unplayable. And I just want you guys to strap in, because I think we're in for a great ride. Clary's going to be cherry ripe. It's exciting times. Keep up the great work, fellas. Bin Man and I are really aligned. Stay positive. Something's happening. We're coming. Go D's.
All right.
Nudge out.
Thanks for that nudge. B-Man, you predicted that our fatigue issues were behind us, and the first quarter blitz and the way we ran out the game showed that. But how do you explain our drop away in the second and third quarters? A 52-point turnaround is worrying, and it has somewhat been glossed over in the revelry of the incredible come-from-behind win.
So what's the question?
Well, the question is, how do we explain the 52-point turnaround?
So, I think it's really interesting. It goes back to what I was saying at the top about the pressure. That's why I found it so interesting, because the pressure numbers look relatively low, and whether that's actually the question for me is how well do those pressure ratings indicate something? But just on that, the clubs use those pressure ratings in game, as I mentioned a few weeks ago. My sense of what happened is, well, one, they're a really good footy team. Like, they are a seriously good footy team. So, momentum shifts, as George said. My take on that second and third quarter is that we allowed them to switch and we allowed them to move the ball. They were really clever the way they did that. They came in with a clear plan and really used the space of the MCG, which is really unusual, because teams have stopped doing that against Melbourne, because it allows us to get across and to cover off and set our zone. My my read on the game is that we actually came into the game with quite an aggressive mindset and a preparedness to get into a shootout. And part of that is giving up some of, it's risk reward. If you play through the middle, you give up the ball in dangerous spots, the opposition score. So there was definitely a factor in that. Their turnovers, I think we gave up 72 turnovers. And so if you play more aggressively, it's exactly the conundrum for the Pies. Sure, it looks great, but you give the ball back in dangerous spots if you do turn it over. So there's that aspect of it. I thought that their strategy of moving the ball and using the width of the G was really clever. It definitely did a good job of exposing Steve May. I reckon 6-day break he's struggling because he was really struggling to get down the ground ball. Lever isn't a great one-on-one player. So as I mentioned before, we lost 29% of our defensive one-on-ones. That's not a good number for the best defence in the AFL. But my gut feel on that middle period is one that they upped their pressure. And, they also up there in dominated territory. There was a question last week about whether we need to dial back on being so territory focused. And I said, well, if we kick accurately, wouldn't even be an issue. It's the same in this match, is that the period of our domination was when we dominated in the first 20 minutes, when we dominated inside 50s, in the last 20 minutes when we dominated inside 50 as a territory. And the reverse is true of Brisbane. When they got on top, they dominated territory. That's why teams want to be territory focused. They want to be time in forward half, is why it's such a critical stat these days, particularly for Melbourne and teams like, all of the leading teams. Time in forward half, you get it in the front half, you score. That's what I was reflecting on that. The problem, if you are smashing the opposition, so you're playing a team not as good on the same level, is that your time in forward half means lots of re-entries because it's coming back in. Whereas Brisbane is 50-50 in the end, that time in forward half. So, it's not, you're not getting as many re-entries because they're winning the ball. The thing that I don't think will happen next time is that we will press up more on them. We won't allow those little dinky 20-metre kicks, because there was one goal that they got. I think it was the one that Ashcroft ended up kicking on the boundary, not far from where Wowie kicked his kick. That tic-tacked all the way down the ground with a series of short passes, sort of like the way that West Coast used to play back in 2018 when they won the flag, and also the Cats before they changed their model and went for a territory model. So they did that really cleverly, but I don't think in the finals we'll allow that. We'll press up like we did against the Pies. We almost provided no frontal pressure in that period. It seemed to me we were happy to allow them to take the space, happy to allow them to kick it around. And to be honest, the Lions were good enough to hit all of those targets. A bit more pressure, they'll struggle to hit some of them. And they also took their chances. They were incredibly accurate in that period, kicked some beautiful goals. I think that would be my read on it. Is it was a concern. It was a smart play. My question would be, if we would have, the next time we play them in a final, I'm positive that we'll apply more frontal pressure and create that density that I was talking about, bring our zone up high. We had our zone set super far back, so that creates a lot of space. That's where that space for the short 20-metre kicks that hit a player on the lead. But once we got the game back on our terms and they started fading a bit, they lost their ability to do that. They couldn't do that in that last quarter. That's what they needed to do. They needed to control the ball in that last quarter. They just couldn't get control of it. And essentially that's what Fagan said in the post-match presser. He said, we just couldn't get our hands in the ball in that last quarter. I don't think they went too defensive at all. I just think that Fagan's right. They couldn't get their hands on the ball. And what they couldn't do in the last quarter is what they were doing in the second, third quarter, which was control the footy by passing and stretching. They didn't have the run in the legs to create that option. It takes a lot of effort to sprint 30 metres and then not get the footy, because you have to have 5 or 6 players doing that. So, they've done that to us twice too, not stretching the ground the same way, but they put scores on us pretty heavily up in Brisbane as well, and in the second half of that game of the final semi last year. So, that definitely is something to look at, that strategy, and other teams for sure will go to town on it.
George, you want
I've got a slightly different take on it. I think our half-forward line was completely given an absolute bath in this game. during that second and third quarter. You've only got to look at the numbers that came out. Kitty Cameron, 366 metres gained. Connor McKenna, 342 metres gained. Darcy Wilmot, 440 metres gained. Most of those weren't from kicks, they were from running. And our defensive forwards, as people like to call them, were non-existent. Charlie Spargo, 0 tackles for the whole game, 60% game time. I think Neil Bullen was off the ground for a good 10, 15 minutes in the third quarter. I thought he'd actually been subbed off. They just weren't running and stopping that run that was coming out of the Brisbane forward lines. You can't set up a wall at the other end of the ground to stop them when they're just running the ball up the field. And that's what happened in that Fletcher goal. That's what happened when Charlie Cameron got his goal. It was because McKenna, for example, had run to the other 50-metre line at the other end of the ground. We were cut to pieces. We stopped them getting the ball was the critical thing, as Fagan noted. But we've got big questions about that half-back line. We've got a first-year player and a Woden. You forgive him for that sort of thing because he is a first-year player effectively. But there's a big hole there that's causing problems. If you're there to defend, you're not just there to run and follow the other player down the ground. We were outrun.
Well, that may be the case, and so that's where we're still I don't think we're 100% fresh. I don't think we will be for another couple of weeks because partly that with those numbers. So, without sort of contradicting that, George, is that when they're running away from you, that's when the press is up. You shouldn't have a player running into space. We won't allow Collingwood to run into space. So it doesn't matter who's running behind, even if they get away from there. So half forward, for instance, in that example, someone like Kitty Coleman, is the amount of space he was allowed. It's not Bullen or Spargo's fault. It's the who's in front of him. They're not in front of him. It's the halfback flank and the midfielders who need to push up and close that space down. And that's what we didn't do in that second and third quarter, which is exactly what we did against the Pies. We completely took away their space. So someone like Dacos, you give him space to run into, the sort of space that Kitty Coleman was given, he'll cut you up. But we clearly elected not to press up and to deny them the space. That's not saying that what you're saying isn't right, and that. But it also points to the critical importance of those high half forward flankers and the Langdons and the Hunter, of the amount of running they have to do back and forward. Exactly that point, George. When you take that running out, suddenly there's holes everywhere.
But I'm not arguing against Hunter and Langdon. They were doing their job. It's the others who weren't.
Well, okay, but then yeah. But then I think that's a bit tough on Spargo and Nibbler to blame their two players on them getting 50-point turnaround. But
not blaming at all. It was their second and third quarter was the problem. They were getting free run through the middle of the ground because there was no forward defensive pressure.
But the forward defensive pressure, all that does is trap the ball down the forward line. So yes, I said in the stats before, our defensive pressure was excellent. So better than theirs. Our defensive pressure.
You can't provide defensive pressure if you've got 0 tackles for a game.
Yeah, well, collectively, their defensive pressure was good. Cozzy was fantastic.
Cozzy's fantastic, yeah, but we've got holes in other places that need to be attended to.
I'm just glad it's not me that's getting screamed at this week. Let's move on. Roosted Far says, at the game, it was clear that we lifted our intensity midway through the third. It went goal for goal at the end, and then we dominated the last quarter. Game over. What's impressed me most in the last 2 weeks is the rise of the second-tier mids under Viney. Can you see a spot for JJ once Oliver comes back? And I think we've spoken about this, George. We've talked often about JJ's role. He's too talented for VFL. Spots in the midfield are hard to crack. He hasn't re-signed yet, and nobody, I've mentioned many times, would begrudge him seeking opportunities elsewhere. However, Clary's injury and Track's move forward have given him the great opportunity to show his wares. Both he and Sparrow have stepped up and proven themselves. When Clary returns, those opportunities may dry up. Sparrow is probably a touch ahead of JJ. Is there a place for JJ in the future, or is this too far into the future?
There's absolutely a place for him, and that's what the impetus is at this time, this pointy end of the season. That he's producing when needed. If he wants to continue, like Melksham as well at the in the forward line, you've got to keep producing. But he's been fantastic in the role that he's been given in the middle. There is a role. All we need, I think, is 26 players to be available in the on the grand final day, because we've got all the slots filled at the moment. But it'll be really, really difficult for the selection committee come when Oliver comes back and Fritsch comes back and T-Mac becomes available, and we've got Hibbert available this week. Fitting all those players who are critical components and playing well into the available number of spots is going to be very difficult.
Lazy says, Big Man totally nailed this in the pre-game thread, saying it would be high scoring and that we would come out and play fast. Big thanks to Andy for taking the Glen Waverley line on Friday night as an omen. And before I get to Lazy's question, I'll interject and explain that one. The train line I usually take was running a bus replacement service, and I guess bugger me if I'm going to take a slow bus to the footy. So I took another line. The line that I took was the Glen Waverley line. And the last time I took that line, it was our corresponding match on a Friday night against the Lions. And incidentally, that night we also had a ruckman who shall remain nameless, who rucked solo and dominated the game. And we also happened to win that game too. So you can thank me for that win. Lazy continues, my question this week is that we are obviously missing Oliver, but it can be hard to explain why, considering contested ball and clearances have still been really good the last few weeks. So would like to hear from you guys what you think the main things we are missing in Oliver's absence. Is it the quick hands out of the contest to clear congestion? Is it the fact that it would allow Petracca to play more forward? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll just play, we've got something quickly from Natch.
I just wanted to congratulate, William and coaching staff on that, because to have the midfield stand up without Clary and Track for large parts of the game, I just think it's magnificent. And to see the likes of Sparrow and JJ, led by Vines to that goal, I just want to say perhaps the most underrated goal in AFL history. That was just ripped it out of a guy, triple his size. Adding for breakfast. I just wanted to really congratulate the guys on those tools that we've got.
So, Big Man, I think our midfield has held up pretty well in the absence of Clary. We've managed to knock off 2 contenders in that time, and Nudge acknowledge the wonderful job the likes of Viney and Sparrow and JJ have done in this time. But what's the main thing that we're missing with Oliver being out, and how do you see the midfield working upon his return? Because it's totally different dynamic with Oliver in there.
In terms of what we're missing, I mean, we're missing one of the best footballers of the last, that I've ever seen. Yeah. I mean, he is just a fundamental star. And one of the problems, I think, with his injury is that and I heard, I think Lever talk about this, he's such a competitive beast. He's never been injured before. He's a nut, apparently, in terms of how competitive he is. He's just desperate to get back out there. And who knows whether, what that's played in terms of his injury. But, I think that you lose a player of that ability. It'd be like the equivalent would be taking Neil out of the Lions team. I mean, he's an out-and-out star. In terms of the sort of thing that we probably have missed the most from him is the way he explodes out the front of the contest when he wins it. So, we talked about this the last couple of years. That's what the big change in his game is, how much more damaging and impactful he is now in the last 2-3 seasons than he was, when he was accumulator more. He was getting 40 possessions but not doing damage. He just does such damage now. He gets it, takes 2 or 3 steps, balances up, and he roosts at 40, 50 metres from a contest, not from the back half. So, so not just, not soft metres gained from kicking out from full back, for instance, so real metres gained. That's the thing that I think we've really missed, and I hard to see us losing the GWS game, for instance, without Oliver in that team. He's just such a competitive beast. But leaving all of that aside, I reckon a real upside of his injury is the extra minutes and responsibility that it's enabled JJ and Sparrow, Captain Jack, to have through the middle, and we saw it. It also means that when Oliver does come back, JJ and Sparrow are in great nick. So, really the point that George made before about options is, totally sort of applicable to Ollie being out as well, because come the pointy end, this, time that JJ and Sparrow and also Viney as well and Gus into the midfield creates options for Goody, come final. So, for example, if oppositions decide to run a hard tag on Oliver, Oliver can sacrifice his game, maybe drag the tag away from the contest or go forward if need be. And JJ and Sparrow can pick up the slack in the middle. And as we've seen already, it also gives Goody much more flexibility in how he uses track, I think, in terms of track's mid-forward mix. As I said before, it's great to see track as a forward, but, that's the sort of flexibility that and options that Goody has is if he's got other mids in good form that he can be confident that he can throw in and will do damage. So I think there's some real positives out of Oliver's injury and maybe for his career as well, that he has had some experience dealing with rehab and injury and all of those frustrations because, he will get injured again at some point, won't he?
We've got a voicemail from Demon Trucker questioning the decision to play Petty potentially sore or injured. I'll just find that. It's here.
Hello, Demon Landers, Andy and the gang. Even though that was the greatest win of all time, well, this is Enzo at the moment, but it was the greatest win, but Petty should not have played that game. Why won't Goodwin give Tomlinson a game since his last game was a beauty and he's been ripping it up in the VFL? If Tomlinson had played, would we have gotten so far back? Because Petty just could not compete. And the biggest difference was when he was subbed out and Joel Smith was able to come out and actually compete with his man and might have saved a couple of goals. Goodwin won't play Oliver because he's only 95% fit, but he's going to play a 30% fit Petty, which could have cost us the game. I don't understand this with the injury management. Can you explain, please, Andy and the gang? Thank you.
Are we sure, George, do you know what the injury was? In your match report, but I don't know if that's what Whispering Jack put in. It said hip.
This is Dr. George, and it's only from what I've seen both in the St Kilda game and in this game when he was re-injured. I suspect he's got broken ribs.
So he came off for the ribs thing. So the question is why did we play him?
He's got broken ribs from this game or previously, you think?
Previously. It was in the St Kilda game. He got whacked pretty heavily in the last quarter. Was subbed out of that game.
Well, he was cleared of any damage. They made it clear in their comms to us that he's fine to play. So
he looked like a player who's got broken ribs or some sort of problem around that area. If the bones aren't broken, might have separation with the cartilage, I think, or whatever that joins the ribs. From my experience in that area is there's nothing you can do with broken ribs or those. It's just a question of managing it. It's painful because people can't sleep, they can't laugh, all those sort of things which causes more pain. And it would have come down to, well, is a Petty more useful to us in this particular game than a Tomlinson? And I suspect that's what they came up with. Given the height of the Brisbane forward line in Hipwood and Danaher, we needed someone who was capable of taking the third one because you'd have Lever and May otherwise occupied, and it was a better option. I don't think this week we'll see Petty come out though. Again, it's the nature of the Adelaide forward line, who aren't as tall, but they're much more muscular in Taylor and Fogarty. We're not party to the inside. We don't know exactly the nature of the injury, but that's my guess at the moment.
And what about? I'm loath to criticise the medical team because we don't know. Like, we've got no idea. We've got no markers. We've got no. And it frustrates me no end. People making sort of judgments on the medical team. And what was another really interesting thing is I've heard Goody as well and Richo and a couple of other come out pretty clearly and push back on injury stuff as it relates to Oliver and the management of his injury. Pretty without, you don't have not much subtext in their comments about basically saying people should pull their head in terms of criticising the medical team. They're not going to put anyone out there who is going to do more damage. I think we need to have some faith and confidence in the medical staff. But what about, George, the decision to leave him on the field? Because there was discussion about that and he did look hampered. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, he went off for a while and then came back on.
It's something that, again, because we don't know the insides and the extent of the injury and things like that, but it is a common factor in across a lot of games. If players are injured in or around that third quarter point, the coaches seem to be very loath to actually institute the sub.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to find themselves in the last quarter with someone who's definitely straight off effectively from a medical reason. So I can understand that, but
and Goody sort of touched on that a little bit in his he was asked about it in the presser, but it's and there'd also be all of the timings and the load management as well. That would 100% be a factor. People, may not factor that in, but Selwyn Griffiths sits down there. I had him in my binoculars with all of the numbers, GPS numbers for each of the players, and they've each got their load they've got to get to. And there's that, thing we talked about last year that was a bit controversial. The year before, about this idea of resilience and playing through pain. But the facts remain that he, maybe 5-6 minutes where he was hampered. He did come off, and he was replaced by Smith, who did a good job, and we did win the game. So.
Yeah, and as far as the Oliver situation, why would you risk a player of that quality when you've got 6 rounds to go? If he pulls that off, his hamstring off the bone, because he's come back too early, you've completely blown the chances of having him playing in finals. We've been winning games in the last couple of weeks in his absence. We've created new options for us as a result of that, with people like JJ and moving track forward. But if Oliver were to aggravate his existing injury, people would be absolutely beyond themselves about the management. I trust the doctors and the physios in this particular matter.
And it will be interesting to see whether he gets selected this week, but I tend to think the same as you, George, is that if history is anything to go by, I mean, he had us all back coming into this game, let alone, what's going to be different next week. Just before you go on, Andy, that Enzo, I'm pretty sure Enzo's Don't Make Me Angry, unless he's got a twin. And I heard Don't Make Me Angry, or Enzo, we will call him, call into SEN on the way home on the train from the game. And I can't recall if you made the same point, but hello, Enzo, if you're listening, I've heard you twice on the wireless in a few days.
Rue Beauty says, Big Man, your rant last week over comments made by David King and Nathan Buckley was music to my ears. Every week, these peanuts in the media make ridiculous clickbait comments and are never held accountable. Geez, it winds me up, and I absolutely feel your pain. On Instagram, EMC sent us a DM and writes, just to add to Big Man's vent, read the media. When Melbourne comes from behind to win in the last minute, it's Brisbane should have won that game. Brisbane would be filthy with that result. When Collingwood do it, it's this team just finds a way to win. You can never write the Pies off. What an exciting team. El Diablo 14 adds, what do you gentlemen think about the echo chamber that is the AFL media? Dacos this, Dacos that, Collingwood premiers already, very tiring and obnoxious. By the way, David King already said that it's Collingwood's premiership to lose, so I think he has already jinxed them. I think, didn't he say it was Melbourne's premiership to lose last year, or many people did. So, Big Man, we all know your thoughts on Collingwood being the media darlings. Do you agree with EMC's assessment there about how the media reacted to our come-from-behind win and how they would have fawned over Collingwood doing exactly the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, really, we didn't get much credit at all for one of the great comebacks of the season. I mean, you don't even have to stretch your imagination much to think about how they would have reacted. Speaking of Buckley, in the post-match analysis, he says that, what did he say? I'm pretty sure he got this wrong, but he said, this is this thing that frustrates me about this sort of ongoing false narrative that the media push. That's what annoys me more about the media, to be perfectly honest. So, I said before, the whole Brodie Grundy thing was a complete a nothing burger. The frustrating thing about it is that it dominated the discussion of the match. So when I wanted to listen on SEN on Saturday morning, that's what they were talking about. The same thing on Sunday. So, that's really frustrating. But for me, I mean, I've got a lot of time for Carolyn Wilson, and I think she's a great journalist. She's been a really good footy journalist, and she's got a real niche, and that's the politics of football. And I think is still the best at reporting on the backroom stuff that happens. But unfortunately, that niche, what she does so well has become the template in footy media, and it's metastasized into the gutter gossip peanuts, like Tom Morris liked to trade in, that clickbait, chasing all the time. So, but that politics and gossip stuff, like the Grundy stuff and will he be traded, that Waitley's already talking about us trading him to Port, for instance. I mean, it's ridiculous. Whilst it's annoying, it doesn't really frustrate me anywhere near as much as the analysis stuff, because that's what teaches people about the game. And so that's that whole stuff about the false narrative about our so-called scoring issues. It's just ridiculous. And Buckley's, he must be believing the same stuff. In his post-match analysis of that game, he talked about it was great to see Melbourne today because we've struggled to get the ball inside 50. He said in the last 7 quarters, but he misspoke because I'm sure he meant the last 7 weeks, because he couldn't have meant the last 7 quarters. We'd won both of those games. But it's ridiculous. Getting it inside 50 has never been the issue. Kicking it through kicking goals has been the thingo. And just on that, so it goes back 7 weeks is that period where we've so-called had connection issues, efficiency issues, whatever you want to call it. 21 scoring shots against Port, 22 against Freo, 21 against the Blues, 26 against the Pies, 23 against the Cats, 23 against GWS. 3 of those games in appalling conditions. In perfect conditions against the Saints, the Lions, we had 19. We had 25 scoring shots on the weekend. That's 1 less than the game against the Pies, yet the narrative is that we're terrible kicking. But the media analysis just drives me nuts with that narrative. But on David King, it was only 2-3 weeks ago that David King was confidently predicting Freo would take our spot in the top 4. So I don't think we've got too much to worry about that prediction being accurate. And so his prediction about Collingwood for me don't hold any water whatsoever.
Speaking of Freo, Demonland's own Whispering Jack says, wondering if you and the panel could analyse where Fremantle is at in terms of their final position to determine where the Luke Jackson draft pick lands. I put this question to Siri and she replied, I am not in a position to answer that question. So much for artificial intelligence. Well, as it currently sits, we haven't talked much about our Freo pick. As it currently sits, we have Freo's first pick, which is currently pick 4. The Dockers have a difficult run home with matches against the Cats, Brisbane and Port to come. Their only winnable games are against the Swans at home, the Eagles in their derby or whichever way they say it out west, and the Hawks at the G. There's a good chance pick 4 is ours. We're a very outside chance to nab pick 3, although it's doubtful. At worst, I think we'll steal pick 5, which at the beginning of the season would have been unfathomable. So that's a big win for us losing Luke Jackson. Fellas, have you been on the Fremantle death ride this season? George, and then Big Man, if you want to.
Giddy up, Andy.
Absolutely, giddy up.
Yeah. I think the best we can hope for is pick 4, and the worst is pick 5.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's a fairly small band of
and it's based around the teams that are around them. Fremantle there's a chance that they might be able to get over Sydney, which would ensure a pick 5. They won't get any further than that. The trouble is Hawthorn won't win enough games to get on top of Fremantle.
Probably won't want to either.
No, the bottom's dropping out of Freo a little bit. They really look.
And they've got injuries too. They got quite a few injuries.
They really look awful. There is a not unreasonable chance, given that they've got to play, Geelong, Port and Collingwood,
yep.
and then the Eagles at home, that they might lose the whole lot. But like I said, I don't think Hawthorn will win enough games to get on top of them regardless of that. So, I think it's pick 4 or 5, put it in the bag.
And I trust our people, Jason Taylor and Tim Lamb, to perhaps try to package something together, maybe get something more.
It's awesome. I've been loving the death ride, and it's like the circle of Freo death. Every game seems to have an influence on it. So it's like it's tripled the number of games that I'm sort of.
Yeah, this week there was the Richmond game. There was a GWS game. Yes, all of it. It all helps out. It's so
that means we'll have pick 4, whatever pick we get from when we win the grand final. So pick 18
and pick 20-something, 22 or
pick
something.
Pick 24 from Freo or whatever it is, 25.
20. it'll move particularly in the second round with all the father sons and the NGAs and all that sort of thing.
But it's still
at the moment.
That's just the number. Those NGAs were going where they were going anyway. It still will get the same pick we would have got.
I think Jack said as of today it was 4, 15, 23, and beyond that, 30 or something like that. But
considering what it was likely to be at the beginning of the year, we thought Freo would be top 4, definitely top 8, probably top 5, top 6.
It's awesome. And I think I heard that Darcy's injured.
So, he looks injured.
And he's keen on leaving, so you probably put him in for surgery. That's just like they just look like their enthusiasm's dropped out. And having followed a team where that's happened a lot of times at this point in the season, you can tell, when they've got that sort of look about them. I think they're in a bit struggle town, aren't they?
And when you've got to come up against a Port, a Collingwood, and a Geelong, even in the coming weeks. You need more than enthusiasm.
Yeah, and then they've got the local derby. They'll be pumping that up as like.
It's Port, Geelong, and Brisbane. They played Collingwood this week.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Casey had the bye this week, but the club was smart to arrange a scratch match with the Saints, which saw the teams play a game out at Casey Fields. According to the information gleaned from social media, it was a 14-a-side match and a couple of Demons were loaned to the Saints to help make up numbers. Brody Grundy was stationed at deep forward but roamed the ground as the game went on. He kicked 1 goal, had 9 kicks, 7 handballs and 6 marks. Cade Chandler was the star of the game. Michael Hibberd showed no signs of discomfort as he returns from a kidney injury, and James Harms worked hard through the midfield. That's all the information that we have. So let's get on to the changes. The only injury concern that we have from the Lions game is the rib injury, I guess it is, that saw Harrison Petty subbed out of the game. As of the recording of this podcast, we have no other information as yet, so we don't know the severity of the injury or whether he'll miss any games. Most of the Ds that are currently injured are 4 or more weeks away, so none of them will be returning this week. As mentioned, Michael Hibberd played in the Casey versus Saints scratch match and looked unhampered by his kidney injury, so he will no doubt be in the mix for a return. Supreme Demon asked the obvious question on all of our lips. If Harry Petty is out injured, does Adam Tomlinson come in as his replacement? Demon WA adds, who comes in for Petty, who needs to get himself right? Tomo Smith and Hibberd would all have legitimate claims. D. Old Fart says, love the pod, guys. Keep up the great work. Chandler or Spargo? I understand Spargo's role, but he hasn't delivered to his normal standard for a while now. Chandler was out of form before he was admitted, but he has reportedly done well for Casey over the past couple of weeks. Is it time for a change? And we've got our good mate Salty, who's been calling in the last few weeks, so I'll play his message now.
Hey boys, Salty here, upbeat on this Monday. I'm sure everyone had a great weekend after that sort of win. Anyway, just wanted to give you a call and ask you about what you think about whether we look to switch Spargo over with Chandler. Do you want any changes? Are you happy with the team? Are you happy with Smith coming straight in for Petty if he's injured? Or what would you like? How would you like us to look against Adelaide on Sunday? Have a good week. Thanks, bye.
So George, followed by Bim Man, who comes in and who goes out?
I think they'll rest Petty this week for either injury reasons or otherwise, whatever you like to call it. My guess is Hibberd would come in. Like I said, Adelaide have got a more powerful sort of forward line in Taylor and Fogarty. So Hibberd, for me, is probably a better sort of player in that scenario than perhaps a Tomlinson, who would be more easily pushed off, although they wouldn't be playing directly on each other. But I'd say it'd be a toss-up, certainly a toss-up between those two. I think Spargo's run his race. He was dropped from the side for the GWS game, didn't play in that game because he was up there as an emergency, came back against St Kilda, didn't do anything and did even less in this game. I think he had 2 possessions in the second half, 60% game time, 0 tackles. It's sending a message that others will can pick up the slack, and Chandler's the obvious one from that perspective.
Big man.
Yeah, I actually think, I'm not sure. Well, I don't know whether Petty will get rested, obviously. I think there's a chance that they'll play him through pain. But, hopefully if he's got any pain that they'll definitely rest him. But I agree with you, George, is that not necessarily for matchup reasons, as you know, it'll probably frustrate a lot of D's fans. But I could see him, Goody, wanting to get Hibberd back in the team because, is he best 22? I don't know. I reckon he's pretty close to being best 22. He's been brilliant this year, and Goody, I suspect, will want him to get him up and running and back in. So I actually think that there's a chance that will happen, is that they'll rest Petty. I don't reckon Spargo will get dropped. No, certainly not for Chandler. Chandler can't play the role that Spargo can. I take your point about Spargo's output in the last few weeks, but as I've said, there's no question in my mind that's partly fatigue related. And remember that they dropped Spargo, and then he came back as a sub against Geelong, and not an ideal sub, obviously, not in the way Smith is. And I think that's all about load management. And I suspect his numbers and Nibbler's numbers probably as well on the weekend are around where they're at in their program. Both of them are incredibly aerobic, so that's all about their running power. And I suspect they're still on the upward trajectory in terms of where they're at in their optimal running power, and that would explain 60% game time, for instance, and the drop-off in the second half for Spargs. So I can't see Chandler isn't going to play that role. He's competing with Cozzy in some respects. I see Chandler coming back into that team though. So I mean, there's a lot of pressure on Spots. I just don't think that Chandler's going to be able to come in and play Spargo's role. I think the only likely change is Hibberd in for Petty.
Okay, let's get into the match preview. The Crows are fighting for a spot in the top 8 after 2 consecutive losses. It will be only their second journey to the MCG this season, where they lost in controversial circumstances to the Pies by 2 points a couple of weeks ago. They have an almost full complement of players to choose from, with the exception of lively young gun Josh Rochelle, who was suspended for 2 matches for his hit on Jack Buckley in their loss to GWS. The Demons will be looking to further cement a place in the top 4, or perhaps jump into third place, as we hold a 1.5 game buffer over the Cats, who face the current third place Lions at the Gabba. The result of both of those matches may have a bearing on where we finish this season. AF writes, the Brisbane game was a near shootout, and we were quite happy to be super aggressive with our ball movement and our zone pressing high up the ground. Given Brisbane's lack of pace, our zone could play higher and only be at risk to a Bailey or someone like Cameron out the back. Do we think Adelaide's pace? It's more likely that we'll sit our zone deeper and let them try to move the ball through it, with our aim being to force them wide and then slingshot on the counter, a la the Collingwood game. Or do we go super aggressive like last week and try and blow them away? B-Man, followed by George. How do you see this match playing out?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Another interesting game tactically. I keep coming back to this idea that Goody's experimenting, and he's experimenting not just with positions, he's experimenting with game plans and the way we play. And it feels like that we're trying different things, like this, what I was saying, pressing up high. I suspect that all do 2 things, is that they will look to go fast again and put some scoreboard pressure on. So, no better pressure than scoreboard pressure. So I think that we'll see a start like we did, not necessarily accurately, but they'll look to play fast like they did against the Lions and get a break. But then I think that they will play a very similar setup and structure to the way we played the Pies, because basically the Crows, if you watch them, they play a very, very similar game plan to the Pies, with a big dose of the way we play and so do the Pies, but with that territory and getting it forward. But they like to move it super quick. They were really frustrated on the weekend just gone. Really fascinating game, that Crows GWS game. And I tell you, like I said before, the GWS game when we played them, they are a seriously good football team. They absolutely smashed the Crows in the contest. One thing I'd put a sort of asterisk on that, they ran out of gas. I watched that game really intently. Crows ran out of gas completely. So they're in a different point with their loading program. Remember, Burgess is their coach. We're basically using his template. But that game, I knew, like the talk about the 21-point margin at 3/4 time, I watched that whole game. You could feel the momentum, couldn't you, George? You could feel GWS were coming, and it was a bit like our game. You could feel that if they could get the scoreboard ticking over. GWS, I was super confident in that last quarter they'd actually win it, and that's the way it panned out. I actually thought, I'm not sure, did you watch that game, George?
Yeah, the whole lot.
I thought Crows started to look a bit flustered, and maybe that was fatigue. They lost that. Rochelle lost his plot, basically, so he's a really excellent out. They will look to, when they're playing their best footy, they are as aggressive, almost more, as aggressive as the Crows. They love to use the corridor. They love to move the ball quick. So I suspect we'll set up structurally very much like we did against the Pies. But I think the difference will be is that we'll come out hard and attacking early on. And what I'm hoping is that we'll also start doing something that we did against the Saints. So it looks like they're trying different things and getting our best game, we get a score and then we control the tempo of the game. Brisbane took that away from us in the second and third quarters. They controlled the tempo of the game. We couldn't get the tempo back. We only got the tempo on our terms in the Brisbane game when we were attacking. But when we're playing our best football is that we're defensively controlling the tempo of the game. And I hope to see a bit of that because I think that mindset of attacking, that's why we gave up 100 points. You don't win many games of footy giving up 100 points. And I heard some stat, incredible, teams who get to 100 points first rarely ever lose. So statistically, it was, incredible win. That GWS game was super, super physical. So, it was a tough contested game, much like our game against GWS. So GWS was. So a bit of recovery the Crows will have to go through, I reckon. And even though they've got a 7-day break, that they'll still feel the effects of that game. It's one less day than us. So that's a big factor. And they also have to travel. So that doesn't help their cause either. There's listeners who don't post on Demonland or read Demonland, there's a terrific thread on Demonland called Stats File, and there's two regular posters there. Demon Dynasty, who does his own or their own player ratings, which is fantastic reading, and then Willow Ratings gives the stats that I read and more for each of the games. But recently there's a new poster who's been posting in that thread called Delightful D, who's posted some fantastic charts and statistical ways of looking at the data, which I've found fascinating. And they wrote on that thread this week that the Crows, speaking of the Crows and coming up against them this week, the Crows have the best differential between actual and expected score this season, which is really interesting. The point was made that this tends to be driven by the Crows taking a lot more difficult shots than most teams, but still converting them into the goals. So it speaks to the importance of the skillful players like Rochelle and his mind's go who's
Taylor.
Taylor, and how brilliant Taylor is from angles, and also what's the guy who came from the Suns?
Suns.
The Suns play the gun forward.
Isaac
22.
Isaac Rankin.
Rankin, yeah. So they've got some super skillful players. They've stacked their forward line with good players. They're very accurate kicks. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. So Rochelle out's a big out for them. Delightful D notes whether this is skill or luck. Probably a combination of both is what they say, and I agree with that. So I thought that's really an interesting sort of way of looking at the Crows. They do take their chances, but they were, I think the weakness of the Pies plan is the same weakness of the GWS, is that under pressure you can take away their strength, which is their fast ball movement, and GWS just choked them, didn't they, George?
Yeah, the GWS defence was absolutely superb, but I didn't see any threat to us that the Crows are going to simply be able to perform. They completely stopped in that last quarter. They were completely cooked.
Yeah, they
had 0 goals in the last quarter. They had 13 entries into their 50 for 1 point for a team that was leading. I think the GWS would have won the game a lot earlier and by a lot more for two reasons. Firstly, GWS have got Hogan as their prime forward and not much else, unless they move Toby Green in there, who's also needed in the middle. So they're deficient up forward, and they kept pumping the ball into the forward line, and they didn't have anyone to do the finishing as required. The other thing was it was in Adelaide, and the number of times that GWS were denied free kicks and opportunities simply because the crowd were behind. You always knew when a goal was kicked because it was complete silence around the ground. But yeah, their forward line consists of Taylor and Fogarty. Fogarty never got a touch.
And Taylor got completely shut out by another Taylor in the second half. I don't think he got a touch either. He's a gun. GWS, just on them, they've really adopted a very much a Melbourne game plan. It's really interesting. And then they've eschewed the sort of notion of moving it super fast to focus on their defence first footy. And I think I heard their defence is the best defence statistically in the last month. And they were really impressive. It's interesting, George, how fatigued Crows evidently were. It was so obvious, weren't they? They were just couldn't run out of their shadow. No. And so one suspects that's to do with the loading, of course. So what that means for this game is, well, they'll freshen them up this week because they've got the travel, so they'll be fresher against us. But it was such a physical game. It's hard to see them not at least being impacted at some level by how hard GWS were at the player. Yeah,
absolutely agree that extra day that we've got will make, I think, a huge difference.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah, players like Dawson and Laird and who's their other one? Can't remember. Just complete Sloan, just completely disappeared in that last quarter. It's completely disappeared, and the Kellys and the Canelios overran them completely. But like I said, I think GWS would have won by a lot more if they had more available targets up forward. But we're not playing them this week.
And so the way I hope the game will go is that we will jump out, blitz early, put scoreboard pressure on, and then what I would like to see is us then controlling them, because for a team like for any team, but a team like Collingwood and a team like the Crows, if you get a 4 or 5 goal lead against them, well, what are they going to do to reel that in? They'll go back to what they do best or know best, which is to go fast. If you then can take them going fast away by controlling the corridor, doing exactly what we did against the Pies and squashing them up and making it super hard to do so, you take away their one wood. And so I really am looking to this game for that. And so, for us to get that tempo footy, controlling the tempo, which is when we're playing our best footy, I reckon.
Nudge in the chat room said that Petty has already been given the all clear, 100% right to go according to the club today.
Fantastic. Is that like when the coach gets the CEO backing him the week before they're sacked?
Yeah. So Petty confirmed out, I guess. Anything else about this game from either of you?
No, I'm looking forward to it Sunday afternoon at the G. The weather's looking good, Andy.
Yeah, I don't know. I was about to look at it before and I got sidetracked looking at something else.
5 mils predicted.
Sunday, looks clear. It's got a picture of sun and clouds, so that's good for me. 13 degrees, that's fine. I'll wear my jacket. Precipitation, nothing. All right. We're set to go. Was that Sunday? Good. Yes.
That's the only thing that's going to derail our season, a sort of monsoon that lasts from now until the end of September.
No, looks all good, and it's raining on Saturday, so hopefully not too much. And the grounds, the ground holds up pretty well now. It doesn't look like it's raining too much on Saturday. That's good. Happy with that. All right. I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing another famous victory. No, I don't want a famous victory. I want a thumping. That's much better. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30. Thank you to our loyal listeners that provided us with feedback this week. Thank you to Matt B, Peter H, Luann on Facebook. Thank you to our voicemailers, Nudge, Demon Trucker and Salty, who called in a bit late, but got you on there.
Wasn't so salty this week.
He wasn't. He hasn't been salty for the wins. And I'll just mention frequent voicemailer Noah. You sent in a voicemail, but Noah, you sent in the voicemail right after the match, and you must have been walking outside again, and the wind just butchered what you were trying to say to the point where it would have been absolutely unlistenable to play on the air. So in future, if you are calling in, then find a nice quiet place so we can hear what you're trying to say, but appreciate the call though. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Binman who submitted his first question to the podcast. So welcome
second, Andy, second. Obviously didn't get any traction in the first one.
No,
you even told me I'm not allowed to ask questions. I had to make an amendment to say I was asking for a friend.
So thank you to your friend for asking the question. Thank you to Deanox, Jabroni, Oh My D's, Demon WA, El Diablo 14, Supreme Demon, Scroll, Half-Hearted, Hoof-Hearted, who had a dig at George, Dale on Twitter, Von, D Me, Pew Pew Pew, Mandalorian, Singer, Rue Beauty, Rivers Run Red, in the deep end from our Facebook page, Nudge, Horny Fagorny, Titus Toddy, Bruce 2, Smurf, Bigfoot, Demon Saw, Red Sox Mans, Nairobi Demon, What Say What, Monocular, Roosted Far, Lazy, EMC on Instagram, Whispering Jack makes, I think, his question asking debut, D Old Fart and AF. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and read it out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on.